Hello there. So last night was the 40th anniversary of the Nintendo Entertainment System, and while I had nothing planned for the occasion, I figured I needed something out there since the NES was a huge part of my life for the better part of it. Sounds about right. So what I ended up doing, and admittedly this was thrown together at the last minute, was I compiled about 15 NES reviews I've done over the past year to highlight the highlights of the console. Try to keep it varied and try to showcase the best, some of which others not so much. As for certain omissions that I'm sure will pop up, the easy answer could very well be I haven't gotten to them yet and thus couldn't be included. But also, I wanted to try and keep it varied and not include many entries of a particular series. So I kept it to like one or two and whatever, right? So, I don't know. Maybe for the 45th, if we do this sort of thing again, which I hope we don't, hopefully we'll have something more elaborate planned for that occasion. But in the meantime, happy 40th NES. Here are some highlights featured on this web zone celebrating the occasion. And yeah, enjoy.
It's safe to say, I think by this point at least, there is nothing that could be said about Super Mario Bros. That probably hasn't already been said countless times before since its original 1985 release, regarding its place in history, its importance, and whatnot. But let's strip that all away. All the history, all the accolades, its effectiveness to give players a sampling of what this newfangled Nintendo thing was capable of, and whatever else. Strip that all away. Put that all aside, and what are you left with? You're left with a game that even after 3+ decades of existence, remains a fun, well-crafted video game that has held up exceptionally well. It's a game with tight responsive controls, a fair learning curve. It has its share of secrets, whether it be something as obvious as Welcome to Warp Zone, or something a little less unintentional like a Minus World, or something apparently less obvious like holding down A while pressing start on the title screen to continue where you last died. Apparently not a lot of people knew about this thing, even though back in the day everybody knew about this trick. But, I don't know, different times, not gonna hold it against you much. As Mario alone or with the second player as Luigi in 2-player alternating turns, your main purpose in life is to run across each of the game's sprawling worlds collecting coins and power-ups, avoiding pitfalls, stomping on enemies, and grabbing the flagpole to clear the stage before the time limit expires. As longtime players would know, collecting magic mushrooms make Mario big and strong enough to break blocks of bricks. And collecting fire flowers enables him to shoot fireballs at his enemies. Sometimes you'll come across secret items like invincibility starmen or special mushrooms that grant you one extra chance. And sometimes you'll come across pipes that leads to shortcuts and wait, why am I telling you this stuff again? The majority of the game's 32 levels take place outside, but some stages take place in underground tunnels as well as some bodies of water, where you must swim past bluebirds and Cheep Cheeps to reach the end line, since you can't jump on them to kill them. At the end of every world, you venture through a castle stage, where you must deal with fire sticks and fireballs before eventually confronting Bowser, either by subduing him with fireballs or collapsing the bridge with the axe to have him meet a fiery end. Accomplishing this task greets you with Toad, the mushroom retainer who helpfully informs you that the princess is in another castle. Lather, rinse, repeat. Control is solid, you hold B to run and A to jump, with the strength of the jump determined by how hard you're pressing the button and by whatever momentum you've built over a nice jog. You don't have the high bounces you'd get in later games in the series, after stomping on Goombas, but what's here works for what the game has to offer. The game does a good job over the course of 5 worlds, slowly introducing new enemies and gimmicks for you to contend with, before putting your skills to the test in the final stretches of the game. Now, it's been 35 years. Super Mario Bros. Is a game that's been played constantly on and off. People know this game, so much so they're doing speedrunning sessions at live events and whatnots over the course of who knows how long. It's pretty amazing stuff. But what about the folks who've never touched this game in their lives? Well, in that regard, the best I could say is that the game has the right balance of difficulty. It starts off easy enough for you to get used to the controls and the gameplay, but slowly becomes more difficult as you progress through the end, and they introduce more stuff. Uncovering the hidden warp zones to skip worlds makes the game decidedly easier, but playing the game from beginning to end, you'll be surprised to find a bit of challenge here and there. Even then, the familiarity of the game doesn't take away from the overall enjoyment of the game. Well, it certainly hasn't for me at least. The graphics in Super Mario Bros. Was a stark contrast to what was seen on the Atari 2600, and even some of the consoles that came afterwards. Smooth scrolling screens, vibrant colors, and well-rounded graphics along with a simple but appealing typeface made Super Mario Bros. A visually appealing video game for its day, and was a template for what the NES was capable of pulling off in terms of visuals, almost reaching that level of graphical prowess that was reserved for the video arcades of its day. This is the kind of stuff that would eventually be turned into a t-shirt line for some reason, but it's still a fine-looking mid-80s title, even if it might not be the prettiest given what has come along later down the road in the NES life cycle. Upon pressing the start button and after a brief intermission, you're greeted with the classic, iconic Super Mario Bros. Theme song. A wonderfully catchy and upbeat piece of chip music that sounds crisp and clear and wonderful. The other themes present in this game, such as the underworld and the underwater themes, are also wonderful to listen to and are timeless classics in their own right. There aren't that many tracks, but the few tracks presented never get old and are still a joy to listen to, even towards the end of the game. Sound effects are your simple fare, but they do have a bit of character to them, and there's a wide variety of sounds for many different situations. That's also classic stuff. I don't know what else to say. Well, how about this for a closing thought? Super Mario Bros. Has its place in history, and it's a pretty important game as far as its role in Nintendo's early stranglehold on the video game industry, and basically an important building block towards an empire that still strives today for the most part. And the reason for that, quite simply, it's that it's a good game. Good pack-in game to showcase what the NES could do while also being fun to play. One wonders what the scene would have been like if they had packed in some other game besides Mario with the NES. Would Nintendo have been as successful had they stuck in some other game like Clu Clu Land or Ice Climber? I suppose we'll never really know. No, who am I kidding? Of course they fucking wouldn't. Nowadays, Super Mario Bros. Can be played on a variety of formats. Aside from the original incarnation, the game is currently available, as of this recording at least, on the Nintendo Switch Online NES service thing. It's been on various virtual console services on Nintendo Wii, Wii U, or 3DS. It's been part of the classic NES series of Game Boy Advance ports of NES titles. And there's even a version on the Game Boy Color, which also includes a truncated version for the Japanese Super Mario Bros. 2 game as a hidden feature. Of course, we can't neglect the upgraded version featured on the Super Mario All-Stars Super Nintendo Compilation, as well as being one of some 20 plus games featured on the now discontinued NES Classic Edition mini console, and of course, it's been featured on many bootleg plug-and-play systems. All methods are fine and dandy, and really, either way you go, it's a classic side-scroller, it's a perfectly functional platformer, and most importantly, it's fun. And that's pretty much all I've got to say about that. So, here's a hot take for you. Super Mario Bros. 2 is the better sequel to Super Mario Bros. Than the game that originally bore the title. Originally a prototype for a Mario-like game engine featuring vertical scrolling, before a deal with Fuji Television turned the game into a licensed property, Yume Kojo Doki Doki Panic aka Dream Factory Heart-Pounding Panic was given yet another facelift to become the American sequel to Super Mario Bros. When Nintendo of America deemed the original Super Mario Bros. 2 for the Family Computer Disk System to be too difficult for the locals, as it were. Because of the game's origins, and also because of its differing gameplay stylings, Super Mario Bros. 2 gained something of a dubious reputation over the years. But even with all that said, Super Mario Bros. 2 USA is a fine game in its own right, and perhaps most of all, did more to shape the Super Mario lore and expand on the gameplay than the other game did, which was simply Super Mario 1 with harder levels. A good number of characters that are staples in today's Mario universe. Shy Guys, Ninjas, Bob-ombs, Pokies, even Luigi's metamorphosis from Mario in green clothing to taller, slender, I like to kick while jumping Luigi that he is today, that all began in Super Mario USA. But I digress. Super Mario Bros. 2 is fairly simple fare. You pick from one of 4 playable characters: Mario, the balanced player of the bunch; Luigi with his odd-looking high jumps; Toad with his speed and strength curtailed by weak jumping; and Princess, who is lacking in the strength department but can float in the air for a short bit, which is useful for crossing particularly large pits and skipping huge chunks of level. You could switch between characters in between stages, or you could stick with the one character throughout the game. In any event, awaiting you are 7 worlds of various types spanning 20 levels, including the standard plains, desert, dunes, ice lands, and eventually Wart's Sky Kingdom. Yes, instead of the King of the Koopas, you have a frog king named Wart as your main villain. It's something different at least. Each level has a similar goal: make your way to the end, usually guarded by a birdo who must be disposed of in order to gain the crystal ball that opens up this bird-faced thing, locking away the exit to the level, or a larger end-world boss such as a Mouser or a Clawgrip who requires a bit more oomph to conquer. Your main means of attack has shifted from the previous outing. No longer are you stomping on Goombas, now you're picking stuff up from the ground and tossing them at whatever moves. Whether it be plucking vegetables from the ground, mushroom blocks that are just lying around, or even plucking foes to check them at other foes. The entire game is based around your ability to pick things up or stand on them, making for some interesting challenge that lay before you. And you will be making quite a bit of use of this ability, since it's the core of Super Mario Bros. 2. Super Mario 2 doesn't have the traditional power-ups, super mushrooms, fire flowers, things of that nature. Instead, you have potions that will open the door to subspace, where you could grab coins from the ground, and these coins are used in the bonus game at the end of each stage. Enter subspace at certain spots and you'll find a mushroom that you can pick up to add an extra hit point to your health meter, which you can extend up to 4. Each stage starts you off with 2 hit points. It resets every time you start a stage, and if you're down to 1, you shrink, and if you're down to none, you lose a life. Lose all your lives and it's game over, but you do have 2 continues to try again, I suppose. Kill a number of enemies and a heart will emerge from below, which will restore 1 hit point upon collecting it. Collect a number of cherries and an invincibility star will emerge from below, performing the same function it usually does in the previous and other games. Sometimes you can enter jars where secrets are contained. Sometimes you'll need bombs to blow up barricades blocking the way. Other times you'll need to claim a key to unlock a door, all the while avoiding the phantos that chase those who steal its prize. Even with fewer levels compared to the original's 32 or even the Lost Levels 52, Super Mario Bros. 2 does feel like a grander game. Not only are you venturing on horizontal scrolling levels going both right or left, but also vertical scrolling ones up and down, albeit screen by screen in this case. No longer are you restricted to the one path, each level has multiple segments, even multiple paths to reach the end of the level in some cases. There's no real set format beyond there's some boss at the end, kill it, and go to the exit to play some slot machine for extra lives. No truly dedicated over or underworld levels, since you cover all the groundwork within a single level. And you're unhindered by a time limit, so you can explore as much of the level for as long as you like. And the levels, while basic, have their share of variety. Digging through the sand, which spotlights Toad's strength quite nicely. Riding an albatross across a particularly long canyon, which doesn't make for the most exciting level, but hey, it's something. Hopping logs on waterfalls, riding a birdo egg to this part of the level and then just have Princess float over to this other bit and basically skip the whole level. Thus proving that every once in a while, Princess Peach can be somewhat useful and not just be fodder to be kidnapped just to have some Mario game plotline. Or something, I don't know. Control in Super Mario USA is almost on par with the previous game for the most part. Per usual, you move with the D-pad, A button jumps, the B button picks up stuff and tosses it, and holding it down while moving allows you to run. Now here's a fun fact, there was no run function in the original Doki Doki game. This was something they added for this version of the game, which was a bit of a revelation I think. Yeah, you could run now, and also if you crouch for a little while, you'll flash and be able to perform a much higher jump, which is nice, albeit somewhat limited in its use, since the minute you move an inch, you lose this ability. They work about as well as you'd expect. Well, okay, to be fair, it's not quite perfect. The climbing, for example, is a bit suspect, as you could climb up and down perfectly fine, but you could also slide left and right, which causes you to inadvertently, at times, fall off the vine and fall down, which, well, it's rather unfortunate, but other than that, perfectly fine. For the most part, the graphics are somewhat decent. No doubt a step above the original Super Mario Bros. As characters, enemies, and level design seem somewhat more detailed in comparison. It's not exactly high art, however, as there's very little to nothing in terms of backgrounds in the game. The sprites have a rather obnoxious blue outline during indoor or underground segments, but that's to be expected somewhat with the hardware. Some of the bigger enemies are well drawn, with some funny pain animations that play when you hit them. On a whole, in terms of the presentation, visually, it looks fine. The soundtrack, pretty much the same as the Doki Doki game, save for a couple additional traditional Mario themes, is also pretty catchy, which I would expect from the Koji Kodo-san. Again, it's a rather small pool of songs, and the boss theme admittedly tends to be a bit irritable after a while due to its short loop, but the rest is serviceable fare that is serviceable, I guess. As are the sound effects, which are Mario-esque in some regards and just straight up Mario in others. Yeah, that's all I got. Well, some people will prefer one over the other. One will take the lost levels due to sticking with what worked before and just make everything harder, and the other took another game and redressed it slightly with some fixes here and there. And given the choice, Super Mario Bros. 2 USA is the better game because, despite deviating from what came before somewhat, it did expand on the experience with somewhat larger levels, more variety in terrain, new cast of characters, new players to play with. Honestly, I soured on this game in my younger years because it was a different game from 1 and 3. But that came and went. And ultimately, Super Mario Bros. 2 holds up tremendously well after all these years, and is just as worthy a follow-up to the game that started it all. Well, we finally got around to this, I guess. Super Mario Bros. 3 for the Nintendo Entertainment System had a long-winded introduction preceding this that sort of dovetailed into my personal experience with the game, but then I decided to cut it because it ran too long and quite frankly, you don't care. Maybe some other time then. In any event, released in 1990, Super Mario Bros. 3 is either a return to form after playing Super Mario Bros. 2 USA, or an evolution of the form after playing Super Mario Bros. 2 Japan. In either case, it's a big step forward towards building upon and establishing the Super Mario formula that would define the rest of the franchise more or less, and resulting in one of, if not the most beloved game in the NES library, let alone the Super Mario series. And honestly, it's not hard to see why, since this is a very big game. So big in fact that they couldn't fit battery backup. My biggest pet peeve with this original incarnation on the NES, getting that out of the way right now. Let's move on. The game boasts 8 worlds for you to tackle, each with its own theme. A desert world, a world of giants, a world of pipes, and so on and so forth. On top of that, each world has a good number of levels within. About 8 to 10 per world, at the very least, with some boasting even more than that. The scope of the game is presented in the form of a map where you move your little Mario around. Naturally, to proceed onwards, you'll have to clear levels on the map, of which there are a variety as represented by various icons on the map. There are your standard make your way to the goal levels, the most straightforward variety of levels, the castle levels, which unlock doors when you clear them by beating the Boom Boom mini-boss that guard them, the roaming Hammer Brothers, which act as encounter points, much like most role-playing games, earning you reserve items for your on-map inventory, and finally the fortress, where you board an airship and play an auto-scrolling level in an attempt to reclaim the wand from the Koopa Kid in charge, thus moving on to the next world upon clearing. Also on the maps are toad houses where you could get items to add to your inventory for later use, as well as games of chance for extra lives, and so much more. Fairly straightforward stuff. Once you start a level, it's classic Mario fare. There are Goombas to stomp, question blocks to punch, coins to collect and earn extra lives for every 100, Koopa shells to pick up and throw, and power-ups to uncover. The usual super mushrooms and fire flowers make their return to give Mario an extra hit or two, but then you have new power-ups such as the Super Leaf, which transform you into Raccoon Mario, allowing you to fly with a full P meter on the bottom. Just go with it. Further down the line, Mario will uncover different suits. A frog suit will let you swim better, a Tanuki suit will let you fly and turn into a statue for stealth purposes, and finally there's the hammer suit with its arcing hammers and fireproof shell. Along with new suits comes new tricks, such as P-switches that turn bricks into coins and uncover secret doors, a giant shoe you could ride in for precisely one level, platforms that change direction when you land on them, auto-scrolling levels, levels that crush you, Zelda-esque whistles that welcome you to the warp zone, and yes, this is a game that packs in a lot of stuff, whether it be new enemies or obstacles to contend with, or new toys to play with. And with the themed worlds, you're bound to come across something new along the way, whether it be giant enemies or new spinning gimmicks, sort of expanding on the level philosophy of Super Mario USA in some ways, and yet backtracking in others with shorter levels. Yeah, the levels in Super Mario 3 are short, sometimes almost to the point of blink and you'll miss it lengths, which partly explains why there are so many levels in the game and also why there are no checkpoints in the game. In addition to this, there are some other potential drawbacks. With this being a two-player game, Luigi is back to being a Mario clone with none of his unique attributes from Super Mario 2. Take your pick. The lack of a save function via battery backup or even a password system hampers the game somewhat, resulting in some considerable dedication and time sinking to go through the game in its entirety, or resorting to warp whistles to shorten the journey somewhat and miss out on all the fun in between. This of course is something of a moot point nowadays, since we have things like Nintendo Switch Online, NES Classic Editions, and even the old Virtual Console services that have save states. And truth be told, I never played the original version of the game in full until I got the game on the Wii Virtual Console years ago, which is fine, but would have been nice if such a save function, or any save function for that matter, was included on that NES game pack. But I digress. Those are somewhat minor nibbles on an otherwise fine package. For what it's worth, there's plenty of varieties in terms of the levels you tackle, the enemies that the game tosses your way, the array of new powers to toy with, and just a sense of wonderment as you enter the next world not knowing what to expect next, which is also a moot point considering how old this game is and how many people have played it since in all sorts of various forms. And as far as control goes, Super Mario Bros. 3 is probably the best controlling Mario that I've played on the NES, and on a larger scale, almost better than any 2D Mario game that has come before or since, with perhaps Super Mario World being almost on par. Mario has good momentum in the air, the extra bounce he gets from stomping on enemies when you hold down the A button is high and worthwhile, and save for the extra speed boost you get from filling the power meter, which is for your flying bits, it's pretty much the same as the first game. I'm not a fan of the flying in this game, having to tap A constantly to stay airborne or float downwards. In this regard, I think Mario World did a better job of it with the cape, but otherwise, good job. It's probably the best controlling Mario I've played, and that's covering quite a bit of ground. So when you start up the system, the game opens up with the curtains being raised, and a little play takes place before your eyes, showing off some of the new sprite work, which looks better than what came before. Mario looks a little pudgier, and the transformation into different forms are a nice touch. Old foes are given new facelifts, yet retain enough that they're familiar to those who have come before, while new foes come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. Some of the backdrops are basically bigger versions of what we've seen before, bigger hills, clouds, question blocks animated rather than glow, that sort of thing. The maps are functional, simplistic, they get the job done in depicting the world you're traveling in. Not much more to it than that, but what's there, it's done really, really well, and it's a step above what came before. But what really sold me on Super Mario 3 were the transitions. The fade in, fade out between scenes, the circular transition when entering a new level on the map. It's not much, but as a kid, this blew me away that this Nintendo box thing was doing the same kind of transitions you see on the TV. It's really a nice little touch in making the game feel like a big deal instead of just another game, and something I've always enjoyed seeing in some of these NES games, especially later on. Adds a little something to the graphical quality of these games and the presentation, but that's just me. Unsurprisingly, Super Mario 3 has some top-notch quality sound in this here Nintendo game. A small pool of in-game themes, but more so than what came before, with a variety of tones befitting the type of level. A standard overworld theme, a more exciting overworld theme, moody and militaristic themes for the castle and airship stages respectively, even a reprisal of a classic underworld tune. They're simplistic yet catchy. And then you have the maps, which have their own unique simplistic tune, which are also quite catchy. And the sound effects are are a mixture of reused sounds from the older games, as well as some new ones. Nothing groundbreaking, but still quality, top-notch stuff. For many people, Super Mario Bros. 3 represents the absolute pinnacle of the NES gaming library, and perhaps one of the best, if not the absolute best ever on the console, or even the Mario series as a whole. I don't know if I'd go that far, but this is an otherwise excellent game that took what worked before, the classic gameplay of SMB1, the level variety of SMB2, even the two-player mini-battle mode thing is essentially a remake of the original Mario Bros. Arcade game, refined it to make it better, and added a whole bunch of shit to sweeten the deal. It's the absolute best kind of video game sequel. Something old, something new, something familiar, and something blue. I have no idea where I was going with that, it sounded better in my head. Super Mario Bros. 3 on the NES is worth trying out, but it's not the best version of the game out there since it's lacking a save function. That's a moot point if you're playing this on a virtual console, an NES Classic Edition, or the Nintendo Switch Online service, which has save state functionality. The game has also been ported to the Super Nintendo via the Super Mario All-Stars release, and that has saves. But to me, the game was absolutely perfected with the Game Boy Advance port, which is probably my preferred iteration for a variety of little touches. But either way you go, this is one of the milestones of Super Mario lore, and if you have yet to play this absolute classic in any way, shape, or form, give it a whirl. It's one of the better ones out there. Monster Party. The first time I saw this game was actually when one of my younger cousins had this back in the day when we were much younger kids, I guess. Or I guess would be early teens, something to that extent. I remember we'd get up to stage 5 with the dancing zombies. We'd kill zombies for hours on end and they'd just keep regenerating, and after a while we just gave up because there was no way we were going to beat these zombies because there was no end in sight. It would only be years later that we discovered that you actually had to watch the zombies dance in order to defeat them. Which is funny because that's exactly what they tell you to do, but you don't listen to that advice because you don't believe them. And you see kids, even us seasoned game players, have our share of dumbass attacks. And they don't always originate from the occult shelf or whatever you want to call it. Or something, I don't know. Released in 1989 for the Nintendo Entertainment System, courtesy of Bandai and some semblance of human entertainment, Monster Party is an interesting little game with an interesting little bit of backstory behind its development regarding prototypes, betas, deleted or altered content, that sort of thing. It's a backstory that I will absolutely not touch on because there are other people who can cover that area much better than I could. I direct you to that guy who wants to stop skeletons from fighting or something. He has a video on the matter and does a pretty good job of covering that particular base if you're interested in that sort of thing. I personally just want to talk about the game itself because that's all I really care about at the end of the day. The prototype admittedly does intrigue me, but not enough that I'd want to seek it out and give it a go. I'm happy with the one I got, so we'll just look at that and be done with it. So Monster Party puts you in the role of Mark, a kid with a baseball bat who's been transported to a mystical world filled with monsters of all sorts. Your main objective through each of the game's 9 rounds is to seek out and defeat all the boss monsters who are hiding out in rooms throughout the rounds. Once all the bosses are killed, you get a key that can be used to unlock the final door to the level, which will take you to the next level and reward you with a partial health boost, as well as a password to continue your progress at a later time. Monster Party only grants you 1 life, and once your health is depleted, it's game over. Fortunately, you have unlimited continues and the aforementioned password to give you a leg up, such as it is. Speaking of legs up, har har, some enemies will drop pickups when you defeat them. There's the heart, which will replenish a bit of health. There's the question mark, which will provide a random effect or no effect at all. And then there's the capsule, which allows Mark to transform into his monstrous ally, Bert. And Bert is a powerful ally indeed, capable of flying around the level as well as shooting projectiles of varying range and strength. The projectile attack is an odd beast because depending on the level, it'll either be a straight shot or a wave shot or a long range shot or a short range shot or whatever the case may be, In any event, they all do the same thing, provide you with a ranged attack. While Bert is a helpful ally, the effects of the transformation capsule is only temporary, and after a while you'll revert back to Mark and his tiny baseball bat. The baseball bat itself has a rather short reach, but if you hold down the B button while airborne, Mark will hold the bat out while jumping, which is actually useful in landing a couple hits on retreating enemies if you time it right. It's a particularly useful attack against bosses if nothing else. Also, the bat can deflect projectiles back at enemies, which is both a useful defensive tool and an effective attack in and of itself. For instance, deflecting a shock back at a minor enemy would destroy that foe, or any other minor foe it touches in a single hit, whereas it would take multiple strikes from Mark's bat or Bert's projectile to do the same enemy in. Now of course, getting the projectile to deflect in the direction you want it to go will take a little experimentation, but once you nail this, it makes for a particularly helpful tool, especially against bosses. There's also a fast drop ability for when you're in midair and you want a fast descent. This is done by pressing down on the D-pad, and sometimes it's useful. Mostly when you're bird and airborne and want to reach the bottom of the screen in a hurry, but there's the possibility of executing this ability by accident, and when you do, all forward momentum cuts off and you drop down like a rock. Something to be mindful of, especially when you're making jumps over life-draining pits and things of that nature. Both Mark and Bert can duck, which is useful, but nudge the D-pad downwards left or right and they'll do the worm and inch forward. It's a cool little gimmick, but I haven't seen much use for it, and if nothing else, it's fine for a funny visual and nothing else. In general, control is responsive, for the most part functional, and none too complicated to grasp, with the traditional platformer setup of A, jump, B attacks. Like I said before, the only minor quibble is that it was very possible to do that fast drop thing by accident at the most inopportune times of sorts, thus dropping you into an inconveniently placed life-draining hazard, or at times screwing up your rhythm with boss fights. It's happened a couple times more than I'd care for, and while there's never any instances of bottomless pits to be found, even when you're trying to hop platforms and this happens, not fantastic. Fortunately, it's a minor occurrence, and on a whole, I found control overall to be perfectly fine and workable for what the game offers. Monster Party boasts 9 rounds of play comprising 8 proper levels and a final boss battle which is its own little round. And for what it's worth, the 8 worlds are somewhat creative and imaginative, as are the bosses you fight, most of whom will bounce around and shoot random crap at you, and then there are just some who will just do nothing. Like the dead spider, who's dead when you get in, so that's an easy non-fight. And I've already mentioned the dancing zombies at the top of this video. Just let the zombies dance and you'll win the battle. A rare pacifist solution in a 1989 Nintendo game? What are the odds? However, when you really get right down to it, imagination and creativity are the only places that make Monster Party worth your while, as the core gameplay can get pretty tedious after a while. And that kinda hurts the replay value in a sense, because despite the creative nature of the levels and the monsters, you're really just moving around the level, entering doors and looking for bosses to kill. And most of these bosses, while creatively designed, will either just bounce around and shoot stuff at you, or they'll be stationary and shoot stuff at you. Most of the enemies even share a similar pattern. A good chunk will simply walk back and forth, covering a certain distance, allowing you to stay outside their projected range and land the occasional cheap shot. Indeed, once you've cleared the game, you've seen all there is to see in Monster Party, and there's really no point in revisiting the game beyond trying to get a higher score or a speedier completion time, which is more for bragging rights than anything. And if you don't care for that sort of thing, well, meh. Monster Party does try to change things up a bit in later rounds, like in round 6 where you have to navigate a maze of doors to reach the boss you have to defeat for the key, as well as the exit to the level, and round 7 has you climbing up ladders and platforms in single screen rooms to reach the top of the tower. Round 7 is also roomed to a particular glitch where you only need to defeat 2 of the level's 3 bosses to earn the key, but if you defeat the 3rd boss, you lose the key and are pretty much stuck in the level. My only advice here is once you get the key, keep climbing up and avoid any doors. Hell, if you're Bert, you could just fly up to the ladder and circumvent everything in between. Collision detection in Monster Party is not always the greatest. For the most part, it works fine, but there will be times when I will seemingly strike at something with my bat and it doesn't register as a hit. And then there are times when something like this would happen and, well, I don't know what to tell you there. Monster Party's only real high point, for better or worse, is the variety and the imagination of the visuals that are presented before you. Now in general, the in-game graphics are of above average NES quality. The sprites animate simply, they look fairly decent and clean, the layout's fine, there's some occasional flicker here and there, nothing special or groundbreaking to be found here, but it's more about the presentation and atmosphere than anything. Each world is different, varied, and provides its own feel and ambiance, whether it be the dreadfully dull sewer level, the dreamy sky level, the not-so-peaceful water level, the haunting cavern level, or the ear rape level. And it goes without saying that the bosses are actually the highlight of the game, spoofing classic horror bits, being a bit cute here and there, or just plain weird. Each boss has some semblance of personality within its simply animated forms, and I'm not just talking about the quick blurb that gets spoken before a fight begins, which is often amusing. I also love the bloody intermissions between levels. I think they're rather cute. Even as a kid I thought they were kinda funny. But actually when I sit down and think about it, the gruesome imagery, the bloody intermissions, the underage protagonists using drugs. Honestly, considering Nintendo of America's strict yet spotty censorship policies back in the day, it's amazing a game like Monster Party actually made it to North American retail. I think it was only actually released in North America, never saw the day in Japan or anywhere else if I recall. Monster Party boasts a rather varied soundtrack to serenade the player throughout. There are some sort of upbeat tunes, some haunting tunes, some pleasant tunes, and some exotic tunes in there as well. But to be perfectly honest, this is far from chiptune excellence, and some could argue the quality of the music is a bit on the bland side. This failed attempt at ambiance that plays in round 6 is the very epitome of ear rape. But at the very least, the palette of music here is wide and varied. If nothing else, each level has a tune appropriate to its setting. Sound effects are a mixed bag, nothing notable, nothing special, nothing particularly amazing. They're just there, very deep and profound I'm sure, but that's about it. Monster Party is not the most polished game on the market, nor is it the most remarkable. At its foundation, you have a fairly average level platformer that has a couple interesting ideas, but doesn't really do much beyond the bare minimum. Playable enough to be enjoyed for short bursts, but not much more than that. If it had been packaged as anything else, it would have been a forgotten NES game and nothing of value would have been lost. However, while Monster Party might seemingly lack polish, it makes up for it with charm and personality. Every time I pop this game in, there's a smile on my face whenever I catch something cute and quirky, and the incentive to dwell deeper and see what else the game has to offer is strong as a result. Once all is said and done, however, Monster Party runs its course and lacks any incentive for repeated plays. Rather, it's one of those games that you'll pull out once every so often, give it about an hour or two worth of play, or however long it takes for you to conquer the game, be satisfied with what you got out of it, and set it aside for some other time. All in all, fairly average fare with personality. If you could find a copy for fairly cheap, then go for it, why not? Originally released in 1988 on this very day and loosely based on the 1987 arcade game of the... That was 30 years ago. This game's 30 years old. I first played this game at a cousin's house 27 years ago. 30 years, that's a long ass time ago, man. 30 years, sweet Jesus. Loosely based on the 1987 arcade game of the same name, Bionic Commando on the NES basically does what any good arcade port to the NES did back in the day. It took the basic concepts of the arcade gameplay and made a much better game around it. Bionic Commando places you in the role of Rad, a soldier whose mission is to rescue famed hero Super Joe from the Nazi prison camp and... Oh wait, what's that? What? They're not Nazis? But you've got Hitler at the end of the game and his head explodes and... Okay, whatever, fuck it. We'll start over. So the main goal of Bionic Commando is to rescue famed war hero Super Joe from the Bad's prison camp and save the world from the evil war machine, and the rest pretty much writes itself, except for the parts that you fill in with gameplay. You start on this map and you guide your helicopter to these areas on the map. White areas are the main action zones you have to descend upon and clear in order to progress further into the game, while red areas are the neutral zones where you'll gain information on where you should go next, possibly gain some additions to your inventory, or just chill and relax. Neutral zones also prohibit violence of any kind, so if you're a bit trigger happy in these zones, expect a bunch of white uniformed soldiers to come out and give you a little lesson in manners. Bionic Commando is fairly standard side-scrolling platformer fare. You navigate around a level killing bad guys and you're making your way to communication stations to get in contact with your superiors in order to unlock the boss door of each area, where you either get another area to play through or tackle the main boss of the area, which basically boils down to fending off whatever defense there are in order to destroy this power source thing. Once you clear the level, you get a new weapon or item or whatever to add to your arsenal of weapons and items and whatevers. Now the main gimmick is that your badass Bionic Commando cannot jump under his own power. Instead, in order to navigate these levels and survive, Rad comes equipped with his Bionic Arm, a tool that launches a grappling wire. The Bionic Arm is used to latch on to solid objects, either platforms to climb upwards or just swing across, and you could also use the arm to grab items from a distance, and even as a means of defense to push back enemies momentarily. It's perhaps the single most important tool in your toolbox, and you'll need to master the Bionic Arm in order to accomplish your mission objectives. Prior to descending upon an area, you'll be taken to this inventory screen where you'll need to pick a weapon, communication device, and auxiliary items. You start with only the standard gun and red communicator at first, but as you clear areas, you'll expand your arsenal to include other weapons and tools that will not only help your odds a bit, but are also required components to progress further into the game. There's an area that takes place in a dark cavern that obscures everything unless you have a flare to light the way. Some stages have barriers that require a specific weapon to punch through. There's also a mild RPG element where you collect bullets dropped by enemy soldiers to eventually gain hit points that will allow you to last longer in a firefight. And then there's the whole communicators bit where you need to equip the right one for each stage in order to make contact with home base or even wiretap enemy lines. At first glance it sounds entirely convoluted, and in fairness, there's a fair bit of detail to dwell into when it comes to this game about a super soldier with a grappling arm, but it's actually far less complicated once you sit down and play the game, because some of this stuff is pretty easy to figure out with or without an instruction manual. A reserve potion restores your life much like an energy tank would in Mega Man. A 3-way gun shoots bullet 3 different ways. A bulletproof vest protects you from bullets a couple times. A 1-up gives you an extra life. Falling into pits is a bad idea. Landing on spikes is also a bad idea. And you should probably get out of this guy's way, you nerd. As mentioned previously, the key to success is proficiency over the Bionic Arm, and fortunately, it's a rather versatile tool. It launches and retracts rather quickly, leaving you only momentarily immobile, and with proper timing and reflexes, you can nimbly navigate your way across these large levels that might not seem all that complex, but are designed in a way that if you aren't quite capable with the arm, your chances of survival are slim. It's probably a good thing that Bionic Commando sports some solidly reliable controls, making the self-training portion of the game that much easier. Bionic Commando is a lengthy endeavor, and while the overall difficulty is somewhere down the middle, the challenge lies in your ability to use the arm effectively. The levels are of considerable length, but never to the point where it's easy to get lost in. If anything, they're pretty straightforward, even the supposed maze that is Area 8 and its multiple pathways. There is no password system or battery backup to save your progress, and at first you have no continues when you get a game over. However, you can collect some by having your chopper encounter these enemy trucks on the map, which then switches over to an entirely different playstyle similar to the less bionic arcade shooter of yesteryear, Commando. On a whole, a player who knows what they're doing could probably beat this game in about an hour or so. So you've got 12 stages of varying shapes and sizes, 6 neutral zones that all look the same, and 3 overhead enemy encounters taking place on different pieces of real estate. The 12 stages that actually matter look distinct, feel different, and provide a different atmosphere, whether it be invading an enemy outpost in broad daylight, making your way atop a control tower under a blood-red sky, withstanding the smoldering heat of the waste extraction centers, or avoiding man-eating piranha plant things on a mountainside. Even if there's a couple graphical bits here and there that are recycled every now and then, like the searchlights, no two stages look or feel the same. But the very stage design is also a small piece of Bionic Commando's visual presentation, which is pretty top-notch quality pixel work. The mugshots that appear in conversations and wiretaps are detailed, and the little mouths moving are a nice touch, even if it is a simple 2-frame operation. The sprites look pretty good even if some of them look a bit similar to each other's. And your bionic lad looks cool with his cool shades and spiky hair, something that they kept for the later incarnations, and then there's this dipshit. Whatever. Bionic Commando has an iconic soundtrack with an iconic first level theme that's so iconic it brings my icons to an icon. How iconic. No one's going to get that. The musical selection of Bionic Commando is really the only sour point. Not because it's terrible, on the contrary, it's quite excellent, but rather because it's a small pool of music to choose from. Only 2 areas in the entire game have their own unique music tracks, which means the rest of the game's action zones have about 3 tunes between them, which means they get repetitive after a while. Fortunately, the tunes you have in here are awesome and conveniently fit the mood of the level you're in. Only 2 tunes survive the transition from arcade to home console, and they've received a rather substantial upgrade in terms of quality. The sound effects here are also pretty good. The bionic arm sounds good, especially when it clings to things. Explosions sound satisfying. The alarms that play are definitely alarming. Good quality sound here in this iconic... Okay, I'll stop now. Bionic Commando for the Nintendo Entertainment System is 30 years old. 30 whole goddamn years old. And guess what? It's still a damn good game. Yes, there have been other incarnations of Bionic Commando that have come along over the years. Other incarnations that have either improved on the formula or rearmed it altogether, so to speak, or just what the fuck. But this NES version still holds up well enough and is probably one of the better, more satisfying action games on the system. Whether it's the uniqueness of the bionic arm gimmick, the sense of grand adventure and high stakes, the somewhat amusing and broken dialogue, or the satisfying exploding head that somehow went over the heads of Nintendo of America. Anyway, if you somehow get the chance to give this game a shot, go ahead and take it. It might take a good while to get a good groove going, but once you do, then the fun truly begins.
Originally a 1986 arcade release from Konami before being brought over to the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1988, Jackal is an overhead shooter thing where you drive a Jeep along with an optional second player who drives their own Jeep for some 2-player simultaneous gameplay. And your main goal is to move your way upwards, rescue some POWs trapped in various prison camps, and defeat the enemy boss that resides at the very top of each of the game's 6 levels. Your Jeep is armed with 2 weapons, a machine gun that's always shooting upwards, which is useful for strafing runs, and an explosive weapon that shoots 8 ways and can be upgraded about a couple times, from the starting grenade to missiles with explosive spreads. In order to upgrade your weapon, you'll need to rescue prisoners from camps. There's 2 types of camps, one occupied by a single prisoner that will grant you the missile upgrade, and another which houses many prisoners. Ultimately, you'll need to collect as many as you can and then take them to a landing pad where a helicopter will fly by and wait to pick them up, which could result in some big points being scored, which is useful since every few thousand points nets you an extra life. In addition to rescuing POWs, shooting things with your machine guns and missile weapons, you could also run over enemy troops with your Jeep, which is a nice thing to be able to do. However, touch an enemy vehicle, projectile, or other potential hazard like landmines and you lose a life. But you'll respawn almost immediately at the last point you died in with nothing but grenades, basically downgrading your explosive weapon. Lose all your lives and it's game over, with limited continues allowing you to try the level again from the start. Well, I shouldn't have to tell you this, but Jackal is another great NES game from Konami and a long line of great NES games from Konami. How does this compare to the arcade version? I don't know, I've never played the arcade version. Quite frankly, who gives a shit? It doesn't matter. What matters is that Jackal is a fun little game, combining some shooting action with some search and rescue elements tossed in to add to the risk versus reward factor. Having two weapons with different properties also helps to give the gameplay some depth. Sure, the grenade missiles might seem more useful because they shoot 8 ways. Restricting the machine gun to shooting upwards means you could do some strafing runs, take out some targets in a row, and proves useful in some cases. Or again, you could just run over some grunts and kill them like that, but only the grunts. Control is tight and responsive, the overall gameplay is straightforward enough that it shouldn't take you long to figure out how things work and get right into it. Jackal is a fairly moderate difficulty, starts off easy enough and eventually gets harder as you get farther into the game. Some of the difficulty comes from somewhat dubious screen scrolling. You can scroll in upwards, left and right, and sometimes even downwards to a limited degree, which is useful for cover from enemy fire. Thing is, the screen doesn't scroll when you're in the middle of the screen, but rather when you're more towards the edge. This makes it somewhat difficult to anticipate what's coming and could even lead to crashing into enemies and hazards that will simply pop out of nowhere because you had no time to anticipate their arrival. And more often than not, this is what would usually kill me. This is one of the cases where memorizing the level layout is key to survival. On the bright side, there's no time limit, nor is there anything pushing you to advance onwards, so you can take your time if you want. Graphics in Jackal are bright, colorful, detailed, and overall pretty good looking. The jeeps, camps, statues, some of the architecture and terrain all nice to look at. Also, some of the military installations featured remind me of that one airport from the first Ninja Turtles game on the NES. I wonder if they have the same architect. Hell, even the explosions made it to another Turtles game. Of course, there's always the usual NES sprite flicker and slowdown that occurs whenever too much shit is going on, but on a whole, Jackal looks pretty damn slick. Which, again, shouldn't be much of a surprise. Of course, this being a Konami release on the NES, Jackal has some good musical bits. It does not have a whole lot of musical bits, however. The first 3 stages share tracks with the last 3 stages, which is a tad disappointing. There's also your stock collection of sound effects from the Konami NES sound library that if you've played enough of their catalog, you could recognize which sounds are featured in which games. It's not a bad thing, by the way. If you got some good sound effects, you may as well spread the wealth around. Overall, if you like overhead shooters, you like jeeps, you like running over things, you'll probably like Jackal, another quality shooting game on the NES from Konami that also has a fun 2-player mode where you could play 2 jeeps on screen at once and spread more mayhem or something. Great game, well worth a shot or 2 or 20, cheap if you're looking to buy a copy or something, so yeah, Jackal. Loads of fun. Power Blade, released in 1991 by Taito for the Nintendo Entertainment System and developed by Natsume. You know, those folks who made Scat. 'Cause that's funny. For some people, at least. Power Blade is essentially a reworking or reimagining of a 1990 Famicom release called Power Blazer, which featured a Mega Man-esque character running through levels tossing boomerangs at enemies. One could easily assume that this is a mere hatchet job with minor tweaks similar to how Nintendo took Doki Doki Panic and turned it into Super Mario Bros. 2 with some graphical and minor gameplay changes, but that's not necessarily the case here. Power Blade isn't just a reskinned Power Blazer. It practically guts the original game with a major overhaul to the point where it almost feels like a different and arguably far better game than what came before. And yes, I did play the original Power Blazer. The differences are night and day, and that's about as far as I'll go with that game. Let's stick with the superior title. The story of Power Blade, because you really need to know the story here, is that Earth in the future was living the peaceful life until the master computer that keeps the peace goes haywire and wreaks havoc everywhere. So now it's up to Nova and his badass boomerang known as the Power Blade to shut down the master computer. To do this, he needs to venture through 6 designated sectors, seek out the informants who will give him keycards, and use those keycards to challenge the boss of each sector. Beat the boss, and Nova will disarm the sector. Disarm all 6 sectors, and you get to face off against the master computer in the final stage. Sounds good enough for me, so let's get into it. So upon starting the game and picking your level of difficulty, Power Blade starts off with this stage select screen. You know, like that game there. There's no specific order to go through that will give you any advantage or anything, no weapons or upgrades to acquire. You just pick your stages, you beat them bit by bit, and eventually challenge the final level once the initial 6 are cleared. In each level, you have 2 objectives that you have to accomplish. Find the informant hidden within the level, and eventually find and defeat the boss.
Each level has an informant that you need to find so that he or she will give you an access card so that you can unlock the boss door when you come across that. Defeat the boss and the level is cleared. Pretty straightforward goals, even the levels themselves are not. See, each level in Power Blade is a maze, open-ended and all that stuff. So there's no single path to your goals, but rather multiple paths to set goals. This encourages exploration and getting lost and stuff. Well, not so much the getting lost part, because the levels aren't that massive and quite frankly, not that deep, but still. Opening the levels up a bit gives the player an opportunity to explore his surroundings. Sure, you could just go for the primary objectives, but search around and you'll also find an energy tank that could be used as a reserve to restore health in a crucial battle. You know, like that game there. As well as a power suit that will enhance your attack power and deck you out in sweet armor that will protect Nova from damage for 3 hits. If you're good, this will last you a good while, and if not, well, Nova's gonna be left to his own devices, it seems. Fortunately, Nova is no two-way wonder. As a master of the Power Blade, Nova can toss his signature boomerang not only left or right, but also upwards and downwards and diagonally as well. That gives you 8 whole directions to shoot at. And while your boomerang does have a limited range at first, picking up power-ups dropped by defeated enemies will enhance the range of your attacks, the number of boomerangs you can toss at a time, and even its destructive power. It isn't long before you can bring Nova to full power, but be careful. If you lose a life, your abilities get downgraded a bit, and if you lose all your lives, the game ends. On the one hand, you have unlimited continues and a straightforward password system to help you fight another day. On the other hand though, using these options resets Nova back to basics, but considering how easy it is to build back your power, it shouldn't be too much of an issue. Power Blade offers 2 difficulty modes, a normal mode and an expert mode for those who need a little more of a challenge. This basically reduces your time limit and even gives Nova a bit of knockback among other things. But otherwise, Power Blade is a moderately challenging game. The levels are somewhat vast and there's plenty of ground to cover in order to seek your objectives and other helpful tools. There are some platforming bits that require a bit of precision jumping, some enemies can give you a bit of trouble in your weaker state, there are some choice placement in crushers, and in a nod to that game there. Those goddamn disappearing blocks rear their ugly heads to make Nova's mission miserable. Once Nova's at full power, however, enemies can be cut up like butter and even boss battles become more of a minor inconvenience than a full-on massacre. It makes life easier, perhaps a bit too easy for some players, but there's a satisfaction to be had in cutting up big bads in seconds flat, and part of it is due to Power Blade's superb controls. It is as simple and straightforward as any competent side-scroller on the NES would be, and it works exceptionally well with virtually no lag in response time. The versatility of the Power Blade, being able to throw it in multiple directions as well as the effectiveness of the weapon, makes it such an enjoyable tool of destruction to work with. And just the fact that it hits both when thrown and on the return trip opens up a world of possibility when you can strike multiple enemies at once or time it so that the blades hit a single foe multiple times. This much, if nothing else, makes Power Blade an enthralling little game. Picking up a power suit replaces your Power Blade with a wave attack that is nowhere near as fun to use, but it is a larger shot, hits a tad harder, and can pass through solid objects, so there are advantages to that as well, along with the 3 hits that the suit gives you to protect you. The graphics in Power Blade are crisp, bright, detailed, and clean. The Arnold-esque looking Nova is a formidable looking protagonist compared to the Rockman looking Power Blazer fellow, though the poor guy is cursed with the most awkward looking running animation in the history of running animations. Aside from that, you have a world of depth to explore in Power Blade. Whether it be slime-infested tunnels or the gear-infested factory segments, the decent looking waterfalls, or the battleship with cannons blazing, the enemy designs are also top-notch creations. There is of course the dreaded flicker that takes place when lots of stuff is going on. By that same token, that's perhaps the worst you'll get out of Power Blade with very few instances of slowdown. It's a great looking game on the NES that adds to the world of Power Blade, and the few cutscenes you get here are also well done. Power Blade also sports some great sound. Sound effects are as clean and as effective as you could get on the NES, with none of them dipping into the dreaded white noise territory. The soundtrack is also a superb collection of top-notch, catchy chiptunes, fitting in with the various levels you'll be traveling through, despite the fact that they were originally composed for drastically different material. But it's still good stuff, with some musical pieces almost sounding like something that would fit in nicely with a Castlevania game. And this isn't much of a coincidence. Power Blade's music was composed by Kinuyo Yamashita, aka James Banana, the same James Banana who composed the music for the original Castlevania from 1986. Some food for thought there. Power Blade is an example of an instance where a developer would take a previously released game, make some drastic tweaks and changes to the formula, and repackage it into something different, resulting in a new product that not only feels different from the original source, but also turns out to be a much better game as a result. Power Blade might not score points in originality, but that's okay because what Power Blade does, it does really, really well. The controls are tight, the gameplay is solid, the levels are sizable, the presentation is top notch, the challenge is moderate for normal folks and cutthroat for experts, and there's some sweet chiptunes to be found here. It's a shame that Power Blade never got a re-release on the Virtual Console or anything of the sort, because this is the sort of game that's worth playing today, and even decades after its original inception, holds its own very, very well. All in all, an exceptional game on the NES that's worth at least a play or two, maybe even more. Castlevania III Dracula's Curse is considered by most old-school video game enthusiasts to be the best of the three Castlevania games to grace the Nintendo Entertainment System, given all it has to offer and what it does to improve upon the formula established by the original Castlevania. There is substantial merit to this boasting. Although Castlevania II Simon's Quest attempted to expand the straightforward gameplay of the first game by presenting a massive world of open-ended non-linearity, Castlevania III ditches that open-endedness by returning to the basic platforming style of the original while adopting some elements from its predecessor and adding a few touches of its own. So Dracula's Curse is a prequel to the original Castlevania game that came out in 1987, taking place a couple generations before Simon Belmont took up the vampire killer whip. Instead, you take on the role of the forefather of Simon, Trevor Belmont, or Ralph as he sometimes liked to be called, and you must traverse through the cursed lands of Transylvania to slay the evil Count Dracula and his evil hordes of minions. You start the game by entering your name, which is the same name you enter when you put in your passwords. Yes, much like the previous game, there are passwords which can be used to restore your progress in the game. The password system here is a bit more simplified than what you got in Simon's Quest, and that's a good thing. But I'm sure some folks will still bitch about it. Castlevania 3 is pretty much structured the same way as Castlevania 1. You guide Trevor through several levels of play, collecting power-ups for your whip, as well as several various sub-weapons to help you out on your journey to slay the dark forces of the Count. At the end of each level, there's a boss that you have to defeat. Defeat the boss, you move on to the next level, your usual shtick. Gameplay and controls is fairly similar to the original Castlevania, and to a certain extent Simon's Quest. So you only have the basic whip, jump, climb stairs, up and B for special weapons, 3 lives, and it's over. You have that issue with using sub-weapons on stairs, but get over it and you should be fine. One mechanic from Simon's Quest that has been retained is that if you hold the B button while you're on the stairs, you'll keep on whipping, and whipping until you let go of that button, which is a rather nice touch and saves you on the pressing of the button and the mashing of the button and wearing down that button to whip on something that's out of your reach but you're on the stairs. And I'm sure I was going somewhere with this, but I forgot what my point was, so let's move on, shall we? In addition to the basics, you'll come across certain points where you can choose which path you want to take. This little element sets the tone for the rest of the game, as you'll either explore the deep caverns and catacombs, or take a ride on the haunted ship of fools en route to the castle gate. The end result is a bit of variety in terms of the levels and the challenges you'll have to confront in Dracula's Curse, as well as the allies that may accompany you on your journey, and it's a rather nice way of diversifying the game a bit. You could go down one path in one playthrough, or try the other in another playthrough. It's a really nice touch and it's straightforward as well. There's no hidden paths to encounter or discover, or any ridiculous puzzles you have to solve. It's a fork in the road. Take one path or another. Works well enough for me. Also, at certain points in the game, you'll come across an ally who wishes to join you on your quest. Accept his aid, and you can press select to switch between the two. Decline his aid, and he'll piss off someplace else and you both go about your own merry ways. In any case, you can only have one ally by your side at any given time, and when you accept the aid of a new ally, you're pretty much telling your previous ally to piss off and he will bid thee farewell. Either way you look at it, you'll never get rid of Trevor, you're pretty much stuck with him the whole way through. Which is good because he's still the game's best fighter overall, but in any case, Dracula's Curse boasts 3 allies to join you on your journey, each of them with their own unique abilities that can help you immensely. There's Grant, a man seeking revenge for the death of his family at the hands of Dracula. Aside from his fast movement and high jumps, he has the neat ability to climb walls and stick to ceilings, and he can also toss knives or axes while in this state. It's a nice ability that can serve you well if you use it effectively, although he's stuck with a rather short and weak stabbing knife, and he takes more damage than Trevor per hit. He has his uses. Then there's Sypha, a wandering adventurer with a healthy knowledge of the magics and an unfortunate victim of Samus syndrome. Sypha cannot take much abuse and his/her staff weapon isn't that effective, but Sypha's strength comes from the various spellbook weapons that she can acquire, whether it be homing lightning orbs, freeze spells, or a powerful flame attack. He/he has her/his uses, /this/that. And then there's Alucard, the son of Dracula. He can turn into a bat and fly around this place, which is useful for reaching high out-of-reach places and circumvent levels worth of platforming as long as you have enough hearts, of course. Alas, Alucard cannot attack while in bat form, he cannot equip sub-weapons save for the stopwatch, and his overrated Ball of Destruction, while boasting a long range and can be powered up to shoot up to 3 at a time. Well, I've never found much use for that. In fact, these so-called Balls of Destruction suck. Clearly, this is a character not worthy of being the star of his own adventure, which further convinces me that Symphony of the Night was intended to be some other game entirely. Oh, and then there's Trevor. He's the guy you start off as. He has a whip. He can use other weapons. He takes damage like a man, and he could do shit without the hassle of collecting body parts, saving maidens, or babysitting a 10-year-old girl. Trevor is awesome. Trevor will make you his female dog. Castlevania 3 is a challenging game, no doubt about it. Castlevania 1 was hard. Castlevania 2 was rather simple once you knew what you were doing, and Castlevania 3 gets back to being difficult. Much like the original game, damage is determined by your progress in the game. Each hit in the early levels docks 2 hit points, mid levels you lose 3, and in the final levels it takes 4 hits to kill you. Just like old times. Funny story, I used to think Castlevania 3 was actually easier than the first, primarily due to the fact that I was able to finish that game easily before beating the original. So whenever someone would say that Dracula's Curse is harder than the other two, I would usually say, wimp. And then I played the game for the first time in years, and I got to this point, this segment in Block 7, the one where you have to climb falling blocks. This segment is a pain in the ass. But you know what else is a pain in the ass? My foot when it's in it. In a way, Castlevania 3 places a bit more emphasis on platforming, as opposed to straight up whip everything in your path, whether it be navigating balancing beams or moving platforms, or just crossing sections of platforms crumbling away beneath you. Climbing up sections, vertical levels, is hazardous because one stray hit could knock you off a platform and into the abyss below that seems to consume anything underneath the screen. Bosses here will certainly put up a good fight, especially towards the tail end of the game where it gets really tricky. Along with the return of the gameplay stylings of the original Castlevania, Castlevania 3 also shares similar graphical stylings with that first game. Much like his four-son Simon in that original game, Trevor Belmont is once more a hero colored in multiple shades of browns and beige. But hey, at least he looks a bit better than Simon, given it some minor additional details such as the bandana on his head. As a kid, I always thought that line on his head was actually the shine of Trevor's hair, because I thought it was nice and silky and stuff. But upon closer inspection, it's actually his bandana. It's a nice detail nonetheless. But on the whole, Dracula's Curse does dwell more into the world that the original Castlevania introduced. No longer do you have the boring gray stone blocks of Simon's Quest permeating the entire landscape. Now they brought back the original orange blocks, and boy does this game love its orange blocks. Almost to a sickening degree. You know what? I take back what I said about the gray stone blocks. They look better than the constant barrage of orange. I mean, seriously, come on. But at least Dracula's Curse mixes it with other colored blocks, as rare as they are, so it's not all bad, I guess. In all seriousness though, setting aside the orange plague of blocks, Dracula's Curse does look a sight prettier than its predecessors, with various characters, enemies, and whatnots looking a bit more detailed, and in some cases better than in previous outings. The skeletons, for example, no longer bob their heads up and down like they did in Castlevania 1. The Medusa head's much larger than before, the Axe Knight's boasting more detail, the Frankenstein monster twice as tall as he was in the original game, and so on and so forth. The 14 stages, blocks, comprising Dracula's Curse, are varied and vibrant. Whether it be the forest or the swamp or the catacombs and whatnot, all of them look equally dreadful. In a good way. And then there's the little details, the functional gears and clock towers, the distant stars in the night sky, the flowing stream of water, that sort of thing. All in all, it looks good. That's all I got. In terms of sound, there's not much to complain about here. The soundtrack's rather nice, giving birth to classic Castlevania tunes such as Beginnings and Aquarius. There's even a remix of the original Vampire Killer theme in there that plays in one of the later levels of the game, even without the enhanced musical capabilities of the Japanese Famicom version that I'm only mentioning now to get it out of the way. It's a rather nice collection of chiptunes that builds on the goods provided by its predecessors, and some of these actually do a good job of conveying a sense of dread as you progress deeper into dark lands before you, most notably the Nightmare theme that plays in Stage 5. Sound effects are also a significant step forward for the most part. While some sound effects are recycled from the original Castlevania and even a couple from Simon's Quest, they did add some new ones as well, such as a new whipping sound, a new armor collision sound, and even some bits of digitized monster growls. It's actually nice stuff, actually. That didn't sound redundant at all. Overall, Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse usually ranks among players as the best of the three NES offerings, and it's easy to see why. Even if it's in its stripped down, localized form where the graphics are allegedly not as good and the music isn't as good, or it's all a matter of preference actually. Dracula's Curse offers a top-notch Castlevania adventure with diverse levels, multiple paths, multiple characters, a wide cast of foes to vanquish, good visual effects, good soundtrack, and a return to the classic gameplay of the first Castlevania with dabbles of Simon Quest tossed in for good measure. It's one worth checking out whether it's on the original cartridge or on the Wii Virtual Console, one of the shining gems in the NES library. The end.
After a bloody tour of duty in Vietnam, Frank Castle came home to live a peaceful life with his family. But that came to a sudden, violent end when his wife and children were killed in a botched mob hit. Since then, Castle has taken up the guise of the Punisher and dedicated himself to eliminating criminals permanently. Viewed as a vigilante hero by some and a criminal by others, the Punisher only knows one kind of justice, the kind that comes out of the barrel of a gun. Now it is your turn to wage a one-man war on crime, protect the innocent, and punish the guilty. And so we venture into the madness that is the Punisher for the Nintendo Entertainment System, and I still say that intro is brilliant. Simple yet effective. The game intro, not my spiel, whatever. So here's the starting screen, where you can choose from one of three criminals to punish by shooting their wanted poster. Shoot the wall and you leave bullet holes on them. I remember when I was a kid, I'd remember just shooting up holes in the wall, just for hours on end, constantly having fun with this one feature alone, until I discovered that there was actually a game beyond this point, despite reading the manual. But I liked the game too. I liked it a lot, actually. Here's why. So the Punisher is basically a scrolling rail shooter of sorts, where you have to aim your crosshairs to shoot bad guys while guiding the Punisher to avoid weapons fire. Along the way, you can shoot up anything and everything within the level to garner various power-ups such as medkits, ammo clips, and spare grenades. And by anything and everything, I really do mean that. Shoot up a manhole cover, a car, trash bags, walls, security monitors, whatever. If it's destructible, it could contain a power-up. Also, at times, you'll come across a bonus room which may contain additional power-ups. In addition to the various supplies you'll come across, there are also Kevlar vests that extend your life meter, assault rifles which provide a faster rate of fire than your substandard machine gun, and a rocket launcher which provides better accuracy and aiming over your standard grenades for more proficient punishing techniques. There are 6 missions in total, each of them spanning roughly 3 or 4 stages. For the most part, the majority of the game is spent shooting it up. At the end of each stage, the game tallies the number of enemies you've defeated. The more you've killed, punished, or rather, the more bonuses you earn. So you earn extra ammo, health, grenades, possibly even an extra life. But wiping out every single enemy in the stage, I mean getting a full 100% kill rate, will earn you the elusive super gun, essentially a souped up assault rifle that possesses the fastest rate of fire in the game and is quite possibly the most beautiful thing you'll lay your hands on in this game. Just as an example, here's a boss fight with the assassin, one of the later bosses in the game. Yeah, what boss fight? Guy didn't even lay his hands on me. Chump. In the final stage of each mission, you'll meet up with the boss of the mission and have to defeat them to clear the mission and move on to the next. Just be a bit careful. Some of the bosses, such as Jigsaw or the Ninja Seijo, likes to get in close and personal, if you get my drift. You initially start with 3 missions, and as you clear missions, another one takes its place. Once you clear the first 5 missions, it's off to the final confrontation with the Kingpin of Crime himself. While the Punisher seems rather unsophisticated and simple, probably because it is, there is actually quite a bit of depth to this game. Like I said, virtually anything in the levels can be destroyed and or shot to uncover a power-up. Even a bland panel of a wall or unsuspecting piece of backdrop in a level can be shot to uncover an extra life or something equally valuable. And while it might be fun to shoot everything up for the hell of it, you also have to take into account that you only have a limited supply of ammo before you're basically down to a lowly rate of fire. And power-ups aren't always in abundance, so proper use of supplies is essential to survival, much less the completion of your mission. And don't forget, the game rewards you with various bonuses depending on how many enemies you kill. You'd have to clear at least 80% of the level to get bonuses. And again, the more enemies you kill, the more bonuses you get. And while this will help you out with the remainder of the mission, once you start a new mission, you're back to basically your standard machine gun with 250 bullets and 5 grenades. Which is a bit of a downer and somewhat lame, but fortunately it's very easy to acquire all of this stuff. It's not all that hard. Although I said power-ups aren't always in abundance, you'll always find something. But it's a balance. Controlling crosshairs is a simple enough affair. The accuracy of your aiming is pretty spot on. Of course, there are times when aiming can get a bit spotty at times, but that's not generally a huge deal. It's rather insignificant, and honestly, it's nothing that a well-lobbed grenade cannot fix. While the gameplay is fairly decent fare, the sound quality is something of a mixed bag. For one thing, the Punisher lacks music. Oh, there are a couple of jingles here and there that play intermission sequences and boss battles, and they're rather well done for the most part, but the majority of the game is fought in silence with no musical cues outside of the stray sax player that appears every so often. Psst, it might be fun to shoot him down, but try to resist the urge or you'll suffer. Trust me. Actually, now that I think about it, I'm not that bothered by the lack of music. This is one of those situations where music could actually be a distraction rather than complementary to the gameplay. The issue I do have, however, is with some of the sound effects. Now, when you shoot guns, they sound somewhat like guns. When something explodes, it sounds like an explosion. Every hard blow sounds like a hard blow. Well, okay, it's not a big deal. Everything sounds like what it's supposed to. No big complaints, right? I'll take a brief listen to this one clip. Yeah, the enemies sound like they're armed with cap guns. Not too threatening. Even the gang leaders who are armed with rocket launchers seem like they're carrying huge pop guns. And the rather bland looking orange circles of death do not help matters. The Punisher looks good. The various backdrops and settings are neatly created and do complement the rather dark tone of the Punisher mythos. The Punisher himself looks rather well drawn despite comprising mostly 2 or 3 colors. If there's anything negative to be said about the visuals and quite possibly the game in general, it's the lack of variation in the game. For the most part, you'll be battling in streets, sewers, harbors, warehouse, maybe even a prison here and there. And considering the game has 13 stages total without counting the boss fights, you'll be seeing the same backdrop more than once, even if it's in a different color. As a matter of fact, the street setting is pretty much the most commonly seen locale in the game. Not to mention that there's not enough unique enemies to vary the palette. Sure, you have ninjas and scuba divers, but that's about it. The rest has you dealing with petty thugs and mafia wise guys. How uplifting. The Punisher, for the most part, is a satisfying rail shooter and a pretty fun one to boot. It can get a bit bland in the long run, as there isn't enough diversity in the levels and enemies to keep most gamers interested. However, looking past that, you'll find a game that plays pretty well and offers a fairly decent challenge as far as difficulty and gameplay go. It's a pretty straightforward affair that's easy to get into and can get plenty enjoyable regardless of whether you're a fan of the Punisher comics or not. It's a pretty good game. Give it a go. You'll notice that throughout the entirety of this review, up until this point at least, I have not brought up the elusive rainbow. Yes, kiddies, this is indeed an LJN published video game, and LJN is known for releasing crap. But this game, The Punisher, is not one of them.
Long before there were pocket monsters, there was Monster in My Pocket, a toy line of little monster figurines from Matchbox that started off in 1989 and became a bit of a fad in the early 90s, which explains why there is a video game based on the property. This is Monster in My Pocket for the Nintendo Entertainment System, released in 1992 by Konami. Monster in My Pocket gives you two characters to play as, the vampire or the monster, or you could control both in two-player simultaneous action, as you contend with 6 stages of monster-busting action in order to defeat the evil warlock and bring peace to pockets everywhere, or something. Both characters play pretty much the same way. You could run, you could jump, you could crouch, you could shoot a short-range energy wave to kill grunts and hurt bosses, your primary attack pretty much, and you also have a rather nifty double jump ability, which is useful for reaching those high out-of-reach places. Learn to use that double jump because not only is it a helpful tool, but it is also essential to your survival, especially in the later levels, where it relies on this quite a bit. Monster in My Pocket is a fairly standard side-scrolling platformer where you kill enemies with your energy waves and you make your way through 6 levels of play, each with 2 areas and a boss fight. You have 5 hit points and 3 lives to play with an additional life being awarded for the first 500 points and every 2,000 points afterwards. You lose all your hit points or you fall into a pit, you lose a life, usually respawning at the last point you died. Lose all your lives and it's game over, but the game does give you a couple continues to restart at the last level that you died. 6 levels doesn't seem like a whole lot of game, but Monster in My Pocket will keep you busy by throwing a whole bunch of, well, monsters at you. For the most part, it's grunts running in at you, but sometimes you'll have to contend with flying enemies, some platforming hazards, can and hook riding, that sort of thing. While the game will occasionally throw you a bone with the occasional health pickup or a key or screw that you could pick up to toss at enemies for quick kills, or perhaps even carry it all the way to the end of the level and use it on a boss, for the most part your skills, instincts, familiarity with what's coming, and perhaps even a bit of dumb luck are the only tools you have to survive the challenges ahead. Fortunately, you've got good solid working controls that are easy to pick up and grasp, assuming you've played any other side-scrolling platform game on the Nintendo Family NES Entertainment Computer System thing. Excuse me. The double jump mechanic works well enough to the point where there's only extremely rare cases where such an ability would fail me at the most inopportune times. And of course, if one player doesn't cut it, try 2 for some fine co-oping action and lots of flicker. The visuals of Monster in My Pocket are a bit of a mixed bag of sorts, which seems somewhat odd to say considering that on the surface, you've got some pretty impressive set pieces, fairly smooth character designs and animations with some nice detail to them, and some occasional bits of parallax scrolling here and there. The whole little person in Giantland thing is executed pretty well here, so why am I here saying that the graphics are a mixed bag? Well, in case it isn't already apparent on screen, the constant sprite flickering and heavy slowdown when too many things are going on screen tends to hamper the experience somewhat. In fact, there seems to be little to no instance where sprite flickering is not a way of life in this Monster in My Pocket video game. All I can really say is that it's a truly unfortunate thing you have to deal with, and something that takes a really splendid looking Nintendo game down a notch or two. On the flip side of things, Monster in My Pocket continues the Konami trend of excellent sound quality in their NES video games. The rare raspy vocal grunts, the top-notch sound effects that have no doubt permeated other titles under the Konami and or Ultra Games banners, and of course a fine selection of wonderfully composed chiptunes to serenade you along the way, covering a rather modest bit of variety that somewhat fits the level you're venturing at the time. Wonderful stuff. Overall, if you want a little side-scrolling action game on the NES that's fun for a lark and can also play too, Well, actually, you've got a bunch of choices, but Monster in My Pocket fits the bill rather nicely. If you could forgive the sprite flicker, and I know some people are bothered by that sort of thing, that's why I even brought it up, then you have a solid game that probably won't last long, but it'll be a fun time regardless, and that's all that really matters when all is said and done. The card itself isn't too expensive, around the $30-$40 range last I checked, but you could always go for those multi-card things that from that one website that's usually on there. I played mine off the 150 thing. It works. But yeah, Monster in My Pocket for the NES. Good times. Good times.
Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, released in 1988 for the Nintendo Entertainment System, did what any sensible sequel on the Nintendo Entertainment System did back in the day. It took what came before and tossed it out the window to make way for a totally new thing that was completely different. This upset people because they liked Zelda 1 and Zelda 2 was nothing like Zelda 1, so people hated it for some reason. Or at least that's the story I've always been told. I wouldn't know about that though, because my first venture into the Legend of Zelda was The Adventure of Link. Okay, it was technically that cartoon, but that first game I played was the second game in the series, and it was great! It was also brutally difficult for its day, perhaps even today, except not really, because today you have save states and rewinds and things that make it more tolerable than it was before, but we're not doing that shit here. We're going vintage. Big gold game pack in the old top-loading NES. Or the FC Twin. Or the Retro Strios. Or the Retron 5, or whatever console pops up on screen, because I'm trying to cover all my bases here, because I don't know when I'm actually going to play this on, and also, anyways. The Adventure of Link is a proper sequel to The Legend of Zelda, which means you play as the very same Link who once saved the Princess Zelda by claiming the pieces of the Triforce of Wisdom and slaying the demon wizard Ganon to claim his Triforce of Power. Now a much older Link who has grown an extra tall, who has to venture out in search of the third Triforce, otherwise known as the Triforce of Courage, or as the original NES release refers to it, number 3 Triforce. In order to break the sleeping spell cast upon Princess Zelda, who is not the same Princess Zelda you saved in the first game, because this Princess Zelda was placed in a sleeping spell ages ago, and then the king decreed that all the royal damsels would be named Zelda. This is actually in the manual. Nobody would have known at the time, but this was Nintendo's way of justifying their reasoning as to why they can release multiple games in the series starring different characters named Zelda. As to why there are multiple heroes named Link who all look the same? Well, I'm sure there was a perfectly plausible reasoning for this that got tossed out the window once Ocarina of Time came along and ruined things with its timeline bullshit, but that's fodder for another year. Zelda 2 starts you off in the castle, and a new majestic overworld theme greets you on your way out. Once you exit the castle, you're on the overworld map, which is different looking than the previous game, looking more like one of those RPG overworlds like in Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy. Then once you go into a forest or a desert, shadow monsters appear and chase you down. If one of them touches you, you'll have to play a little side level to get out of this ambush. So The Adventure of Link is a side-scrolling action platformer as opposed to the overhead open-world adventure of the previous game. Link can run, he can jump, he can stab things with his sword, and he can deflect most blows with his shield. Later on, Link can learn to stab downwards and upwards by visiting this here knight, both moves vital to survive in later dungeons. And while your sword does shoot a little beam when Link's at full health, it's a little bitty beam with a bit pitiful range and is largely shrugged off by all but the weakest of foes. My advice, don't bother with it and just stick with the close quarters combat because that is the main focus of The Adventure of Link. Unlike in the previous game, you have no secondary weapons to acquire, no boomerangs, no bombs, nothing of the sort. You do gain additional tools, but these are merely means of traversing more of the overworld. A candle to light up caves, a hammer to clear away blockades, a power glove to destroy bricks into palaces, and so on. The focus of the game's combat is almost entirely on swordplay, and learning how to time your blows, especially against shielded foes like the Iron Knuckles or Stalfos, is essential to surviving the perils of this new Hyrule, and is also the one sticking point that either makes or breaks The Adventure of Link, depending on your mileage. Instead of side weapons, Link can learn magic spells by visiting an old wizard who inhabits the various towns. But in order to be allowed to visit some of these wizards, you'll need to complete a side quest of sorts, which usually involves fetching things. There are 8 spells in the game, each with various effects and each vital to your success. Once you've learned a spell, you can select it from the pause menu and press select to execute, provided you have the required magic points. Some spells are instantaneous, such as Life, which is your only real means of healing in the field, or the screen-nuking Thunder spell, while others, such as Shield or Jump, have effects that last until you leave the current room, prompting you to cast the spell again in the next room if you need it, and even then, you can only perform a spell once until you bring up the pause menu again. This keeps you from spamming spells needlessly. In order to improve Link's attributes, you'll need to grind for experience points, which is accomplished by killing certain enemies or grabbing point bags. There are also heart and magic containers that will extend the appropriate meters by 1 block. The idea is to earn enough points to be able to upgrade one of 3 stats: Life, Magic, or Attack. Life increases your defense, it lessens damage received, Magic decreases the cost of magic spells, and Attack increases the damage you inflict upon enemies. Experience gaining and level building differs between the NES and Famicom Disk System versions. In the NES version, each stat has their own point requirements for leveling up, with life levels requiring the least points and attack requiring the most. So you could choose to spend points on life or magic if you have them, or you can hold off and build towards attack, and these levels will stick even after you exhausted all your lives, provided you save your game, of course. The Disk System version is a little simpler. You reach a point value, you can pick any stat to upgrade, which makes it possible to build up one stat immediately to level 8 if that's how you want to play things. There is a bit of a trade-off here, for once you lose all your lives or end your game, all your levels are reset to the lowest level. So you build up your attack levels and magic levels, for example, but your life level is still at level 1, then everything gets reset to level 1 once you lose all your lives and get a game over, and all that grinds for naught. So while the NES setup has a bit more of a grind to it to get to the levels you want to get to, at least when you save your game, your levels will be intact, and that's key. Now, of course, in either case, you lose all your lives, you reset the game, or whatever the case may be, you lose whatever points you have. Something to keep in mind. Oh, and something else to keep in mind? You get a game over, you choose to continue, you restart at North Castle, which means you'll need to make the long trek back to where you died previously in order to continue your progress, which defeats the whole purpose of a continue option. The sole exception of this rule is when you're at the Great Palace, the final palace of the game. You die at that point, you get a game over, you restart at the beginning of the palace, which is, why couldn't you do this with all the palaces, but whatever. Zelda 2 is not as open as Zelda 1. Though there is some exploration to be done, progress is a lot more streamlined and linear than before, as you'll need to acquire certain items in order to progress onwards. This isn't necessarily a bad thing since it gives you more of a focus on where to go and how to proceed, but it does feel a lot more restrictive in what you could do, especially compared to the first game, which was a lot more open-ended and could be tackled in any way. For better or worse, this semi-linear progression would be adopted for most Zelda games going forward. Also, compared to its predecessor, Zelda 2 is a challenging little game to an almost frustrating degree. Like I said, a large part of the game is focused on combat, and for its part, the sword play is pretty solid. Alternating between blocking attacks and returning the favor is part of the challenge. Once you nail a certain rhythm, fighting some of these foes end up being a breeze. Thing is, another part of the game that's tied to combat is the grind. The need to accumulate points to build up your status, which is a far more taxing endeavor compared to simply finding new swords and shit to grow stronger. And the grind is something you need to do in order to survive, let alone conquer, the final third or so of the game where the strongest enemies reside and the more devious platforming awaits. It also doesn't help that the game is lacking in the pickups department, not just in terms of inventory items, but in terms of items dropped by foes when you defeat them, which will either be a jar of magic or a bag of points, which means the only way of replenishing health during the heat of things is either through life level ups, collecting heart containers, slapping gems into the temple furniture, or using the life spell to restore your health, assuming you have enough magic to cast the spell to begin with. And if you don't, then you'll have to find jars or kill monsters hoping one will drop a jar, and that means even more grinding. Either way, the trek between towns will be long and treacherous, and there's always the looming cloud hanging above you in that no matter how strong you get to be, there's always someone who's going to be hitting harder, and the knockback per hit is no fun, especially during the platforming bits. Oh yeah, there's quite a bit of platforming here, including some unhealthy bodies of fluid that await you down below. And while Link can make some leaps without much trouble, others not so much, which means needing to use the jump spell. And while I have little to complain about in regards to the swordplay, when it comes to the platforming bits, let's just say Link isn't the most nimble hero around these parts, and his basic leaping prowess leaves much to be desired. On the flip side, if you're lucky enough, you could pull off this little trick. Whee! I don't know what happened. I don't know how it happened. I just wiggled the D-pad around and just doing this thing, and I've never had this happen to me before. It's funny as fuck. I'm not gonna lie. Regardless, while the challenge is great and crushing at times, it is never impossible, and anything can be conquered within the means you'll find. And when you beat the game, you don't get a second quest per se that's harder than previously, but you do get to replay the level with any spells and levels you've gained previously carried over to the new game, so that's something, I guess. The Adventure of Link sees a massive graphical improvement over the original Legend of Zelda, with more details and terrain types added to the overworld. Yeah, Link is basically a walking doll in the overworld, but he's a walking doll going through forests, deserts, and even graveyards. No coastlines, however, that's kind of disappointing. With regards to the side-scrolling bits, you have some good-looking monsters, from the moblins to the iron knuckles to those dog things with the clubs and shields. Link and the other humans look pretty good too, even though the civilians have a couple frames of animation to them at most. The scenery is pretty good, even if it's reusing some assets for the various areas you'll explore. And while each palace has similar room layouts, at least they look distinct from each other with different colors and blocks. At least on the NES side. The Famicom version has the palaces look similar, if not outright the same at times. And then there's the audio, which is another divergence between regions. Much like the original game, Zelda 2 was originally a Famicom Disk System release, which means there's a bunch of digitized noise that people would like to call creature snarls or growls or whatever the case may be. They sound awful. Actually, a lot of the sound effects in the Disk System version are kinda scratchy and grating, and thank fuck the NES version redid those sound effects so they don't sound like shit. But besides that, the Famicom version has slightly different cave music compared to the NES version, and to be honest, the NES version sounds a little better. More bold, more adventurous. The title theme uses digitized samples on the Disk System version, and it sounds fine, I guess. A bit too scratchy for my tastes, but whatever. The boss tune has a longer loop in the NES version. I don't know. Music's fine. Some of the non-sample sound effects are fine. And I kinda prefer Zelda 2's item jingle than the usual one, but that's just me. Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link is a fine game, albeit one that might not be to everyone's taste. There are things to like about this game. The combat's pretty solid, the use of magic and some role-playing elements being implemented are sound ideas. There's more of a focus on what to do, and hey, being able to interact with other people outside of their creepy caves is a nice thing, but then you've got some spotty platforming, the need for endless grinding, some frustratingly difficult parts, and having to restart at the North Castle after every game over is a pain in the ass. Forget trying to compare this to the rest of the series because that's just a waste of time. The Adventure of Link does its own thing and follows its own beat. And I've always enjoyed Zelda 2, so I could put up with its eccentricities, but others might not, and if that's the case, no worries, plenty of other games in the series that would be more to your liking. But if you could put up with some of the quirks that the game throws at you, then The Adventure of Link might be worth your while if you want a challenging side-scroller. Ultimately, your mileage is going to vary on this one. Oh, I guess not. Never mind then. Time to go home. Kirby's Dream Land was the first game in the long-running Kirby series, initially perceived as a beginner's game, and playing it now, you've got the basic groundwork of the Kirby formula and it got the job done, but clearly something was missing. Kirby may have been born on the Game Boy, but Kirby didn't become Kirby until he went on a little adventure, if you will. Hence today's subject matter, Kirby's Adventure, released in 1993 for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Plot-wise, it's similar to the first Dreamland game. King Dedede is being a rotten scoundrel again, terrorizing Dreamland with his many minions, and it's up to Kirby to put a stop to his nefarious plans, because that's all there is. Fairly simplistic plot, nothing too deep. Blow through the menus, beat the big bad, the day is saved, right? Right? So Kirby's Adventure, which was the first Kirby game that I ever played way back when, is what I'd like to call the true birth of Kirby. Again, Kirby's Dream Land may have been the first game in the series and established some aspects of the Puff of Puffs, but Kirby's Adventure was the game that introduced Kirby's signature trait, and that is his puffy pink complexion, which made it oh so adorable. Oh, and his ability to suck enemies into his puffy pink puff bowels and steal their powers. To use a Trek analogy, if Kirby's Dream Land was the cage, then Kirby's Adventure was the man trap. You know, the one with the salt monster. Kirby's the salt monster that sucks the salt out of people. Never mind, nobody's going to get that. Anyway, it's Kirby's Adventure, and it's a much larger game compared to the first Kirby's Dream Land game. 7 somewhat massive worlds broken up into little stages, and in each stage you have to venture to the end of the level dealing with enemies and other hazards. Kirby, as before, can suck up some air to become a floating balloon thing to fly around and such, as well as suck up enemies and spit them back out to kill other enemies and such. Certain enemies, when gobbled, will cause Kirby to flash a bit, and pressing down will not only cause him to swallow said foe, but also acquire whatever power that foe may possess or something equivalent. There are 24 different powers that Kirby can copy, ranging from projectile weapons to melee strikes, and even a couple grapple moves. And on the rare occasion where Kirby manages to gobble up 2 or more foes with flashing powers, well, you may get a completely different power chosen completely at random. Unfortunately, only one power can be held at any one time, so you'll have to ditch your current copied ability if you wish to claim another. Kirby will also lose his copied ability if he takes a hit, though he could get it back by gobbling up the bouncing star before it goes bye-bye, or if he falls into a pit and dies, in which case said ability is lost forever and you'll have to find it elsewhere. Aside from that, Kirby gains 2 other useful abilities, the ability to break into a sprint for greater speed, as well as a nifty slide move, useful for clearing away those pesky star blocks from your path. I am obviously not saying anything that you probably don't already know, because Kirby is a big thing now. He swallowed a car after all. Or the car swallowed him. I don't know, maybe it's a consensual swallowing or something? How would that work? Why even mention this? I don't know. I don't care. Let's move on. For the one solo NES outing, Kirby's Adventure does not skimp. This is not a short romp through Dreamland that'll take you 20 minutes or less to blow through, no pun intended. This is a fairly big enough adventure with a lot of levels and challenges for you to tackle, lots of somewhat unique boss encounters for 1993 at least, and also, again, a sizable arsenal of abilities to aid you in your quest to end this nightmare in Dreamland, no pun intended. Control is pretty tight, it's snappy, responsive. Kirby moves like a dream compared to his Game Boy outings. When you pause the game, you have a brief description of your current ability, which is a helpful piece of business to know. And the levels sometimes are set up in a way that when you get a new power for the first time, the next segment or two would be designed with said power in mind, which is a nice way of teaching the player how these things work in practice. It's an adventure so massive they implemented a save system via battery backup, so that each time you clear a level, your progress is saved, and you have 3 save slots to record to, which is standard with these NES save systems. But in addition to the action bits, there are other bits as well, such as minigames. There's one at the end of each level where you have to slingshot yourself to the clouds above, and the higher you go, the more points you score, and if you manage to reach the highest point, you get a 1-up. There's a crane minigame where you have to try and nab the Kirby dolls for extra lives. There's a fast draw minigame where the fastest draw win and you earn points and a 1-up. There's a Coliseum pitting you against the mini-boss whose powers is yours for the taking if you win. And finally, there's a museum where a stationary foe can be swallowed without much effort, giving you a freebie, so to speak. Don't forget the egg catching game. There's an egg catching game where you catch enough eggs, you get points, you catch all of them, you get a 1-up or something. Nobody cares about the egg catching game. They replace all of these in a remake anyway, so who cares? The trade-off is that in later worlds, these bonus rooms are closed off, and the only way to unveil them is to uncover these switches hidden in various levels of the game. If you clear a level and the door on the main map doesn't change color, there's probably a switch that you need to uncover, which aren't necessary to beat the game, but for the completionists out there, it's a nice way of keeping track. Now I say this adventure is massive, but I never said it was overly difficult. Kirby's Adventure does retain that welcoming novice difficulty that eases newcomers to the genre in, and while there might be a couple trouble spots here and there, it's not going to make you sweat all that much. Hence why, much like Kirby's Dream Land 1, when you beat the game you'll get a boss endurance mode, and when you beat the game with 100% completion, you'll unlock an extra mode which is basically the same game, except now you have 3 hit points instead of the usual 6, and you can't save your progress, so you have to beat this in one shot, and doing so unlocks the sound mode. Of course, these days with the game available on things that feature some sort of save state functionality, that last part is something of a moot point. Kirby's Adventure retains the overall visual look of Kirby's Dream Land, as a lot of the characters, backgrounds, blocks, and other assets were brought over from the Game Boy title and pretty much look the same as before, though there are some slight tweaks if you can spot them that make them look a little cleaner on the NES side. Of course, there's a bunch of new stuff in there too, and that stuff looks good, fits in with the cutesy overall appearance of the game. And also, everything is in color. Except for one stage, which is in black and white. A nod to Kirby's monochrome origins with only a puff of pink to be found around these parts. Runs fairly smoothly for the most part, but this being the NES, there's going to be occasional bouts of slowdown and flicker whenever things get a bit too crowded, shall we say. There's also a pleasant collection of tunes to be found here, with only a couple taken from the first game, along with most of the sound effects and little jingles that game produced, which also got a bit of a touch-up here and sound a bit cleaner, but otherwise sound mostly the same. And of course, again, there's some new sounds here as well. But the music here is quite nice, much more pleasant and happy compared to the Game Boy version, which is kind of, it was okay, but the tunes here are better. With only a couple somber tunes towards the end, but you'd expect that because it's more towards the end and, well, whatever. It's all good. Kirby's Adventure would be the sole NES outing for the little guy, and they made that one shot count, pretty much giving Kirby that last piece needed to evolve from cute little vacuum puffball to the fluffy pink murder machine he would become today, as the copy ability was the game-changing game changer to change all games and make Kirby more fun. That wasn't redundant at all. Not to take away from Dreamland 1, that laid the foundation, but Adventure filled the parts that were left to fill, and the end result was a fun little platform game that's fun for the whole family, even though it's only a one-player game. Oh well. It's been re-released a number of times over the years. It's got a remake on the Game Boy Advance in Nightmare and Dreamland, a fine remake by the way. But Kirby's Adventure leaves a lasting impression that would inform the rest of this fine franchise and is just an enjoyable game as a whole. If you've never played this one, you probably should. It'll change your life, or at least make you feel all warm and fuzzy inside. I don't know, it's all I got. Bye! Tetris, the Soviet mind game, released in 1988 for the Nintendo Entertainment System by Tengen, or Tengen as it's supposed to be pronounced, or so I'm told, but I'm not going to bother because, you know, old habits and all, was the first version of Tetris that I have ever played. Now you notice the shape of the game pack, which is quite different than the usual NES game pack, and that's because Tengen Tetris was an unlicensed cartridge and a source of contention in a series of court battles between parent company Atari Games and Nintendo. But that's a story best told by gaming historians and such, or maybe they could make a movie out of this too. Long story short, Nintendo won the case, Tengen stopped making NES games, which makes this version fairly uncommon these days. Despite this, Tengen's Tetris is a common title on a multitude of NES and Famicom multi-card things, often identified as Tetris 2, which is not to be confused with the actual Tetris 2 that would come along later down the road, but also not to be confused with the other Tetris 2 that was only released in Japan and came with Bombless. Don't worry, none of this shit matters in the long run. Atari Games previously produced an arcade version of Tetris that we looked at years ago in a previous video, and Tengen Tetris is only loosely based on that game in that it shares some musical bits and graphics, but is more like a traditional marathon game where every 30 or 50 lines cleared moves you up a level and the speed increases. But most notably, Tengen Tetris is the only traditional NES Tetris to feature a two-player mode, whether it be a competitive or cooperative mode, which is a peculiar experience in the latter case. We're not counting Tetris 2 in this regard because that's a different beast entirely, and we're also not counting Tetris 2 and Bombless because that was only available in Japan. I feel I shouldn't have to mention that last point, but you know, it's the Twitter age and people are fucking stupid. But I digress. Anyway, for those who have never played Tetris, try to keep up. But you fit in blocks in gaps to create lines which go bye-bye, and you keep doing this until the game ends, which can occur when you top out by filling past a certain point or something. And it's a perfectly fine take on Tetris, essentially the building blocks for the classic Tetris game. This version drops the hard drop of the previous game and replaces it with the soft drop, which basically increases the speed of your block's descent whenever you hold down, allowing for more control. You also have the ability to rotate clockwise and counter with the A and B buttons, which open a universe of possibility and strategy. It seems ridiculous to make a big deal out of that, considering it's sort of a common thing nowadays in Tetris games, but back in the day, going from what you had before to that had to seem like a big deal to the people who went in that direction. As before, you can choose your starting stage, which determines the drop speed of your tetrominos, as well as the height of gaming garbage to clear away. After clearing 30 or 50 lines later, you'll get a score tally while a Russian troop performs a little dance number for you. The better you perform, the more dancers come out to perform, and then you continue where you left off, unlike the previous game where clearing a stage resets the board with a relatively clean slate. Over the years, I've come to learn that people tend to gravitate towards Tengen Tetris due to its multiplayer options or maybe the style of presentation, and there will be more argument that it's perhaps the most feature-filled take of the NES fare. Competitive modes against a second player or even against the computer is always fun for a lark, but the cooperative mode is the more intriguing bit, where you and a buddy are both controlling falling tetrominos in this single well. That requires a good sense of teamwork and is naturally best played with a buddy because the computer tries, but it's not always the best partner and will often go out of its way to try and fuck you over. I also like that while you're both working together, you also have separate line counters, which is wonderful. Tengen Tetris controls fine for the most part and manages that fine balance where it doesn't feel too stiff nor do the blocks move too loosely. That said, I tend to prefer the feel of the later Nintendo version. This one doesn't feel quite as smooth. I think it's the soft drop where you hold down and there's a bit of a delay before it eventually starts to move faster. That usually kind of threw me off a bit, but other than that, it's still pretty solid regardless. One thing to note is that when you pause, the gameplay freezes in place and doesn't cause the screen to black out or get replaced with a message telling you to press start. And I do appreciate that. It's a minor thing, but it's something I appreciate because that always confounded me for some reason. As stated before, Tengen Tetris is largely based on Atari Games' arcade Tetris, sharing much of the visual assets and style of that game but in a somewhat lesser form. The falling tetrominos have duller colors, and when they land, they turn into a single color, depending on the current stage, which I thought was an odd but interesting effect. The main layout is simple and clean looking, with the second player slot occupied with a screen showing the number of drop pieces in single player games. I don't know why they chose to represent this with a graph format, but I'd imagine it serves some use to somebody who wants to make a gag in a video somewhere down the line.
You ass biter!
I also like the line clearing effect in this version, but don't care for the random numbers that pop up on the side when you land a piece, mostly because they're usually hard to make out. Tenjin Tetris's musical selection comprised a number of Russian folk tunes, a couple that were also featured in the Famicom Tetris game as well as the Atari arcade game. The tunes are simple yet catchy little melodies that fit in nicely with the overall Russian theme. The sound effects are rather low-key. No noise when you rotate the pieces, a soft thump when they settle in, and a creaking noise when you clear the lines. For some reason, I kind of like that sound design in a Tetris game. Don't know why, it's just a weird thing that appeals to me, for some reason.
Batman: Return of the Joker for the NES. Apparently it's a sequel to the first Batman NES game that was based off the 1989 movie, even though this particular video game has little to do with either the movie or that earlier title, other than the fact that the Joker has returned and is causing trouble yet again, and it's up to Batman to take him down yet again. Now that's a comic book epic for the ages, ladies and gentlemen. Batman: Return of the Joker is more of a straightforward action side-scrolling platform thing than its predecessor. You control Batman and must make it from point A to point B in each level on your way to the main boss. Because of the straightforward nature of the levels, your wall jumping ability from the first game is gone kaput, never to be seen again. But you do have a nifty slide attack which has some uses, and you do have the ability to shoot upwards. Yes, once again, Batman is equipped exclusively with firearms in this video game. You start off with a standard wrist blaster shooting mini batarangs for lack of a better name, but can acquire other weapons along the way such as homing missiles and a slow but powerful blaster type thing. If you hold down the B button while equipped with any of these additional weapons, you'll charge your weapon and fire a more powerful shot. The shot varies depending on the weapon equipped. Some enemies will drop pods that will charge your B meter for lack of a better name, and collecting 8 of these pods will transform Batman into a gold-colored Super Batman for lack of a better name, which gives you a constantly firing super gun and invincibility for a limited amount of time. Pits and crushing ceilings can still kill you in this form, however. There are 7 stages of play in Return of the Joker, each divided into either 2 or 3 rounds. At the end of 5 of these stages, you'll fight a boss, which is actually structured a bit differently from the usual platforming stuff, such as Batman suddenly able to withstand more than 8 hits, as was the case with the main levels. Also, you tend to retain your powered weapon after losing a life during the boss fights, but losing all your lives will bring you back to the preceding round. Stages 2 and 5 lack any boss encounters, but instead you'll have this shooter style setup where Batman is on a jetpack and shooting down various robots and other things. In the grand scheme of things, Return of the Joker is really nothing special as far as the gameplay goes. It's a straight up platformer with some shmup segments and specialized boss fights, but that's about it. It's not reinventing the wheel or doing anything new or innovative in regards to the genre, it's just content in offering a game that plays fairly straightforward for the most part, and it does this just fine, I think. Control's actually pretty solid and responsive for the most part. Jumping's fairly decent, Batman moves about smoothly and without delay, and while a slide is no replacement for the wall jump, there's never really an instance where you really need that wall jump because the levels are really straightforward affairs, nothing too complicated in regards to level design. That having been said, Batman Return of the Joker is hard, at times almost stupidly so. Even though the levels are fairly short and straightforward, there's a tendency to have so much shit thrown at you that it feels somewhat overwhelming at first. It's definitely one of those games that you really have to take your time with and not rush, or else you're going to meet a very early demise. This is especially evident in the snow level of the 3rd level, where missiles are dropping from the sky and you have to contend with wind wizards and slippery ice. There's also some tricky platforming to deal with and also ambushing enemies that you'll have to fend off. And it can be a pain in the ass, no doubt, especially the first time out. Things aren't helped with the knockback you suffer whenever you take a hit. Funny thing is that you're only knocked back if you take a hit while grounded. If you take a hit while in midair, there's no knockback, you just lose any and all momentum and drop to the ground. There are no health pickups either, so all it takes is 8 hits or a timely fall into the abyss below, and you can kiss your bat ass goodbye in grand fashion. On the bright side, you do have a password system to save your progress, a straightforward one at that, and you do have unlimited continues, which helps. Believe it or not, the boss fights are actually not that hard because you could withstand a hell of a lot more than you could during the platforming segments, and it takes a bit of memorization to recognize the patterns and all that. Even the shooter segments are fairly easy fare. On a whole, it's not an impossible game, but there's a fairly good chance you won't be clearing this on the first shot. Not when they toss shit like this. The original Batman video game for the NES sported some truly impressive graphics for the console, with its highly detailed visuals and suitably gothic level layouts that nearly matched the tonality of the movie it was adapting, even with some of the liberties taken with the game itself. But as good as that game looked, Return of the Joker really trumps it with some of the most impressive visuals to grace a Nintendo Entertainment System. The characters are big, detailed, and Batman especially moves about fluidly. There's fantastic use of parallax scrolling in regards to the skies and the underground shooter segments, which look great. And the stages themselves are beautifully crafted and detailed. This is one of those games that really pushes the NES to the limit in regards to the visuals, and really shows what could be done with the hardware if the developers were to put their minds to it. And sure, the game has its share of flickering, no doubt evident on screen here, but it still looks bloody good, and even so 20 plus years later, this is still pretty impressive looking stuff. Top notch all around. Sound-wise, well, no surprise here, it's something of a tradition for Sunsoft-developed NES games to sport some fantastic musical pieces, and once again Batman Return of the Joker continues this tradition with a selection of excellent tunes. The opening title theme in particular sets the mood for the dread you're no doubt going to face in the 7 stages before you, and when it comes to the in-game music, you're getting some really awesome chiptunes on display here, and they do a fairly good job of setting the mood and getting you into that frame of mind that business is about to pick up. Sound effects, on the other hand, are nothing special. They're just there. That's a good thing, by the way. Overall, Batman Return of the Joker is a highlight on the NES library. The gameplay itself isn't that unique, and a challenge level may be a bit meticulous for some, especially in the later levels. But the game makes up for it with its impressive presentation in terms of visuals and sound. In this regard, this is an example of a game that can really define what the NES is capable of if developers put their mind to it, and the end result is a pretty spectacular looking game. All this would have meant nothing if the gameplay wasn't worth a damn, and fortunately Return of the Joker is a solid game in its own right, and worthy of any NES library worth their salt. And, well, I might as well bring it up here, wasn't going to touch on it, but the Sega Genesis did receive a version of this game called Revenge of the Joker, but despite the 16-bit facelift and the additional colors, the game actually looks and sounds a bit substandard. Definitely nowhere near as good or polished as the NES version, which is just a testament to how well made that NES game was. As such, I'd suggest staying away from the Mega Drive version and going with the superior 8-bit NES version. And yeah, I just said that. Funny how that works. So once upon a time, there was a video game company called Capcom who put out a little game called Rockman, which was then localized into a game called Mega Man. And it was something of a unique beast for its time. You were able to go through any of the initial 6 levels of the game in any order you wished. You gained new weapons by defeating the bosses of these stages, used those weapons in a sequential rock, paper, scissors order against other bosses, and the game essentially had solid gameplay mechanics that enabled you to conquer 10 challenging empires.
Or if you were a complete pussy, you would use the pause trick to win.
Oh my god, it works well!
It wasn't a huge hit, but it was enough of a sleeper to merit a sequel, and the rest you probably already know. The original Mega Man set the foundation for what would be the beginnings of a popular franchise, and subsequent sequels would add their own layers. Mega Man 2 established a template that would be followed by later Mega Men, such as 8 Robot Masters to choose from, Passwords, Energy Tanks, and Skull Castle. Also, it was considerably easier to clear than the original game, and that's not even taking into consideration the so-called normal mode, which made the game even easier. Mega Man 3 added the slide ability to go through narrow passages, as well as introduce a couple staples of Mega Man lore, and it was also more of a challenge to conquer than Mega Man 2. Following 3 games of a similar ilk, Mega Man 4 didn't have a lot of new things going for it. It added a charge ability to your newly dubbed Mega Buster, as well as alternative means of getting extra tools, and some limited alternating paths. But the 4th edition in the series took what came before, added a couple new perks, and put it all together in a way that makes the whole thing seems like something refined and fresh. For me at least, Mega Man 4 took the tried and tested Mega Man formula and refined it to perhaps its finest form. The first thing that set Mega Man 4 apart from the rest was the framing story. No longer were you fighting the forces of evil Dr. Wily, but instead the forces of the supposedly evil Dr. Cossack, a Russian scientist who conveniently built his own robots to counter Mega Man. While everybody, long-time fans, short-time fans, and non-fans probably all know better by this point, having played the game and all in 20 plus years since, this was actually a bit of a big deal back in the day. And it was actually something somewhat different from the previous efforts, at least for the most part. In terms of gameplay, Mega Man 4 is your standard Mega Man fare. Pick any of the 8 Robot Masters, fight through their stages, defeat the boss, claim their weapon, and repeat the whole process 7 more times until you're able to access the final stages of the game. It's a simple formula that works, and doesn't really require that much tinkering. Much like Mega Man 3 introduced the slide as a new ability, Mega Man 4 grants you the ability to charge your Mega Buster and unleash a more powerful shot against your foes. This ends up being a helpful tool in Mega Man's arsenal, especially since the bosses are much tougher and your basic shot only takes off 1 point off their meter. Fortunately, your robotic K9 Rush is back to aid you with the Rush Coil, and 2 other adapters you have to earn. If you played Mega Man 3, you already know what they are. They're the Rush Marine, which is a submarine, and a Rush Jet. The only change to the Rush Jet is that it propels forward constantly, but at least you have control over the altitude and speed. So, yeah. In addition to your usual Rush adapters, you also have 2 additional accessories, the wire and the balloon, that you must actively seek out in the stages themselves, where they are hidden in places you would not normally look. While not necessary additions to your arsenal, they are useful ones and are needed to reach places you otherwise couldn't get to through normal means. This kind of extra meat adds to the play experience in Mega Man 4, and is something that is also applied in later titles to a certain extent. Another feature introduced in Mega Man 4 is the occasional appearance of Eddie, aka Flip Top, who will drop a random item to help you out, whether it be energy capsules, lives, or even energy tanks. The variety of weapons you acquire in the game are fairly decent, with a couple being altered retreads of previous weapons. While I can agree that Brightman's Flash Stopper is a ripoff of Time Man's Time Stopper, the name says so after all, I'll argue that Brightman's variant is better than the Time Stopper due to the fact that it doesn't drain your entire weapons meter, and you can also shoot while everything is frozen. The Skull Barrier might not be as offensive-minded as the Leaf Shield, but at least you won't have to worry about it launching prematurely by pressing the D-pad in the wrong direction or something. That is, if you even bother to use it. Even so, the few unique weapons like the chargeable Pharaoh Shot, Dive Missile Seeker Weapon, and Screen-Filling Rain Flesh are also fairly useful weapons in their own right. And unlike in 2 or 3, you can revisit stages you've already beaten before in case you want to recover any adapters you missed, or to stock up on energy tanks or lives if you so desire. This is especially useful if you're continuing a game because the passwords do not take energy tanks into consideration. And also you can go back and hunt for those balloon and wire items that you might have missed the first time around. Unlike in the original Mega Man, when you reach the end of a level, you automatically exit the level rather than refight the Robot Master that you just killed, which is just fine. The levels that you'll be fighting through are typical Mega fare, but they're nicely designed. Toadman's stage starts you off in the rain, the wind actually impedes or enhances your jumping ability. Shoot a light bulb enemy in Brightman's stage and the whole place goes dark for a short time. Carefully make your way past Dustman's trash compactors, all the while destroying barricades and avoid being flattened. None of it is nearly as intense as dodging super lasers in Quickman's stage in Mega Man 2, but they are all equally challenging in their own right. The second half of the game certainly has its fair share of challenges. Mega Man 4 is rather challenging, not as difficult as Mega Man 1, but more so than Mega Man's 2 and 3. Yes, the Mega Buster does make things somewhat easier along the way, but the game itself is fairly tricky in certain aspects. Navigating portions of Brightman's stage in the dark after you shot down a light bulb enemy while avoiding the pitfalls is not exactly a walk in the park, but it's doable. Likewise, the last leg of Dive Man's stage has you timing your movements to avoid the mines and spikes that float up and down along with the wave. A daunting feat at first, but nonetheless beatable. There's a later level that has you hopping along platforms while the stage scrolls on its own. Every level has its share of challenges, and some of it might be considered difficult, but it's still fairly winnable. Longtime Mega Man players, however, shouldn't have too much of a problem with this. The Robot Masters themselves are hit or miss. Some dismiss the designs as goofy, but that's akin to saying the Earth is round. They're not exactly the most threatening cast of characters you'll ever come across, but they're not the worst either, and they could put up a decent fight if you let them. Pharaoh Man can give you trouble if you don't stop him in a flash. Drill Man's fairly durable even with the weakness weapon. And Skull Man's a fun fight with just the Buster alone, especially when your shots ping off his shield. Man, it sounds beautiful. It actually tells a bit of a beautiful story there too. And yeah, once you trap him in a pattern, Toadman's a bit of a joke, but you know what? So was Airman. Take a few hits for the home team and pelt the bastard with pellets until he's turned to scrap metal. Easy. Besides, if you slip up the holding pattern with Toadman, his rain flush and body splashes can do heavy damage. Certainly, I would feel more threatened by a fat body splashing toad thing than a scuba diving robot who shoots bubbles. Or a spinning top robot. Or burn rooster. Wait, how did I get there? With that out of the way, I'll admit there's nothing exceptional about Mega Man 4 in regards to the visuals. After all, the art style hasn't really changed all that much over the course of 4 games and beyond. Then again, if it isn't broken, don't fix it, right? All the Mega Man games have crisp, clean-looking graphics, and this one's no exception. Everything in the game just looks bright, colorful, and fairly detailed given the art style. No complaints at all, really. Okay, I'll mention there's some flicker and some slowdown issues at times, but in all honesty, I've never really experienced that much lag during my playthroughs, and flicker, quite frankly, is a constant in pretty much every Mega Man game once too much stuff is going on. One thing that I should probably mention is the weapons menu. Realizing that pop-up boxes and sliding menus were not the way to go in previous entries, Capcom decided to create an entire screen showing off all your toys. That's right, the weapon screen where you would pick and choose your various weapons, items, and energy tanks from made its debut in Mega Man 4. The one notable improvement in Mega Man 4 is the soundtrack. People will probably consider this to be blasphemy, but the music in Mega Man 4 I feel is some of the best in the series. No one Mega Man game has more appropriately composed music or iterations of classic tunes than this one, and more than anything does a fantastic job in giving the game its own atmosphere compared to what came before. True, it can be said that the music here is less cheery and a little heavier than those of its predecessors, but at the same time, it does help in giving this entry its own musical identity for better or worse. And if you were going for a different vibe with Mega Man 4, it's only fitting that the music follows suit. The sound, on the other hand, is your usual Mega Man sound clips, which are classic and good enough. The only real complaint I have is that whenever you charge your buster, it brings up the annoying ringing noise that plays constantly and ruins the beautiful soundtrack as a result. Fortunately, they somewhat kinda sorta fixed this in the later games. Other than that, solid work all around. People will often point to 2 or 3 as the best in the classic Mega Man run, and it's somewhat of a shame that people would often overlook Mega Man 4 needlessly because they believe the game ripped certain aspects from 2, but I prefer to see it as a refinement of a successful formula, just as Mega Man 2 was a refinement of Mega Man 1. This one has it all minus the totally unnecessary difficulty select presented in 2 and the broken password system present in 3. While Mega Man 2 introduced the standard by which all games in the series follows, Mega Man 4 refined the formula to perhaps its finest form. It looks good, sounds great, plays wonderfully, and is just an all-around solid package.